up, we laugh, and we go tied by his own. Locked in secrecy, they show up without warning. Executed by a hired assassin. Perhaps the answer will come someday soon. Rational explanation. Locked in secret, they learn parts of a dismembered female body had been found in a remote. And where is the rest of the body?
Alright everybody, welcome to the Eerie Hours. I'm your host Gene Skinner. That was an Unsolved Mysteries theme remix by Overthink. And if you actually want to listen to that, I will get that for you right away for sharing. Here we go. Is that actually going to pop up? Yes, it will. Let's share that. And I will put that in the music section of the Discord. I hope we're all having a good night tonight. Oh, I don't know if I did that right. I think I actually hit cut. Or maybe I didn't. Okay, let me get that. And let me move over to our next video thing, which we'll get to in a minute. So let me just post this real quick in the music section, like I said. I hope we're all, like, I'm repeating myself. Hope we're all having a good night tonight. So, before we get into anything here, first, don't forget Spooky Movie Night is going to be doing something at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They are going to be doing the Cruel Summer Vampire Week, Part 1. Featuring the Lost Boys and John Carpenter's Vampires, so be sure to tune in for that if you are interested in seeing anything like that. I'm sure Harry will post a link in the chat. Or someone will post it for him. I don't think he has mod status in the chat. So I'm going to open my beer here. This is a triple dry hopped cashmere wandering into the fog. It is a double IPA. Triple dry hopped with cashmere hops from Abomination Brewing. I'm going to pour it. No. Fuck. Didn't want to do it there. That was dumb. Should have known better. Cans are always a pain in the ass to pour out of. Didn't make too much of a mess, but I shouldn't have done it there. Well, places that was kind of dumb of me. Should be alright, though. Still waiting as the bubbles die down just a little bit. So, tonight's topic is going to be a primer for missing 401 cases because the actual bulk of shit on YouTube about them is huge. There's a lot of videos talking about it. Two of the people that will be the main sources for tonight will be Mr. Ballin and Paradox. I will watch some of their videos talking about it, with Paradox first going over what Missing 411 is. So here you go.
We pick over the few details preserved about those gone, select facts that have been recorded by the media or shared by the family.
David Paltese, yes.
Most of those who are missing become lost to time. This is part of the allure. We can project onto them our own beliefs and insecurities. We can entertain the illusion that we are preparing in some way to avoid their fate, while similarly we can confront our own mortality. We are drawn to these stories because we are trying to understand. However, there are some cases that cannot be understood. Not completely.
Oh boy. Pandox, excuse me, I said Paradox. Pandox, sorry, man. It's all about how people disappear in national parks. David is the original person that brought the subject to light.
Face masks
oh yeah,
and
he
social
is.
Distancing. A record number of Americans have surged to visit national parks in 2020 and 2021. With the expectation of clean air, open space, and solitude, these visitors are unaware of another danger yet to be uncovered. There are roughly 640 million acres of federal land considered to be national parks and forests. These lands are overseen by the National Park Service on behalf of its parent agency, the Department of the Interior. It's a lot of territory
Still take
to
Luna
cover,
coin, right? Yeah, totally.
And it's a lot of area to get lost in. One expert has conservatively estimated 1,600 missing persons cases within the United States National Parks and Forest System.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery surrounding
Others
what
have
causes all the
estimated
people to
it could be
disappear.
between 2 to 10 times as many. David
Reasonable
Paulides
things
is the
of there could be
leading civilian
mobsters or anything else, serial killers in the woods too,
tracking,
even more
and
fantastical
exposing
things like
cases.
there's David.
Paulides is a former lawman and investigative journalist who received a tip from a Yosemite
But there's a lot of weird
ranger.
shit that happens
The
in
ranger
national parks.
expressed concern
So keep that in
about
mind
how
if you're
missing
going to one.
persons cases were being handled. The ranger complained that the National Park Service would mobilize resources, coordinate manpower, and spare no expense while the cases were the focus of media attention. However, as publicity and search and rescue efforts faded, the cases were forgotten. Paulides filed Freedom of Information Act requests petitioning for a list of disappearances. He received a response from an attorney who initially balked at his request until stating that no central database existed. He proposed that one could be created for the Yosemite National Park, but Paulides would need to cover the costs, estimated at $34,000. Additionally, they offered to complete a master database for all 383 national parks for a fee of $1.4 million.
So, closing that tab.
For this reason, there is
I don't
no
think
way
you
of
guys see that,
knowing
though.
how many have gone missing because, troublingly, there is no centralized registry or database to
Glad
catalog
you're doing better,
and
by the way,
track
Shrimp. I
these
just read everything we were putting.
disappearances.
Skinwalkers, too. There's a
This
lot of shit.
discovery is what
Weird
led
shit.
Politis to form the Missing 411 and Can-Am Missing projects.
Yes.
The first
Can-Am
book,
Missing Project was
Missing
one of the ones I saw, too.
411 Western United States, sparked national interest. And Politis has since written more than half a dozen additional books,
The
developed
movies,
TV
yep.
series and
There's a movie
documentaries,
that's made by his
and
books,
spoken
too.
publicly about national park disappearances. These books are titled after the number that can be dialed by Americans to reach the local information directory. Therefore, the title Missing 411 is supposed to be interpreted as, quote, missing information, unquote. In these books, Politis has collected and compiled cases according to geographic clusters. These outlier cases could not be explained by animal predation, mental illness,
It's CIA
criminality,
bears. Oh,
voluntary
yeah. Glow
disappearance,
bears.
or other causes, and yet they shared uncanny and unexplained commonalities. These profile points have changed over the years. For example, some that were described by Politis in an interview with Art Bell in 2015 were not included in his most recent documentary, Missing 411: The Hunted. Therefore, the following list may seem longer than usual for those familiar with the topic. It's said that the unexplained and strange disappearances in our national parks share many of the following characteristics. This is the composite Missing 411 profile.
For Art Bell, yeah. Art's dead.
Victims who go missing are usually on either extremes of the intellectual spectrum, ranging from the highly intelligent to those who are struggling with mental disabilities.
Yeah, like a lot of
Victims
people.
who go missing are usually on either extremes of the physical spectrum, ranging from the very fit and active to
And
those
age-wise,
who are
there's gaps
disabled
between
or
everything. It's really
sedentary.
weird how many people
The
disappear.
time of disappearances is often mid to late afternoon. Commonly, there's geographical clustering, with multiple disappearances occurring in the same area. Severe and inclement weather coincide with the disappearance or at the beginning of the search. Victims often go missing near large bodies of water, boulder fields, or berry bushes. If the victim is recovered, they have no memory or they have surreal narratives to explain their disappearance.
Yeah, there have been very
The
weird
cause
narratives.
of death is
that people
often
are found.
undetermined. Bodies are recovered in areas that have already been thoroughly covered by search and rescue. Search and rescue teams will often be unable to find any tracks,
sign
or
that they
if
were
tracks
there.
are found, they will somehow vanish mid-path. Canine units will be unable to pick up a scent, or
It was
if they
me.
can
I
pick
knew
up
it,
the scent,
Strog.
they will not pursue it. One or both shoes are often missing from the body of the victim. Despite often traveling great distances, the bare feet of the victim will be surprisingly unscathed. Lastly, victims are often found in areas that are difficult, if not impossible, to reach.
Again, this is a good coverage of
especially
what we'll
in
be
the
hearing a
time
lot tonight,
elapsed.
because all these are stories and
While
things
this
of that
video is
nature
not
that
meant to debunk the missing
you know,
411 profile,
Pandox and
it is
Mr.
worth
Ballin
noting
will
that
cover.
some
There's
of
a few
these
other people
points
too
could
on
be
it, but those
explained
are the
by a
two main
sampling
ones.
bias.
We'll be seeing a lot of videos
For
of
example,
tonight.
those who go missing in the late afternoon would be reported at a time when visibility is low and
Yours not bad,
search-rescue
by the way.
operations may be
Sorry.
delayed until sunrise. Those who go missing before inclement weather would have a higher likelihood of not being found because visible tracks would be diminished, visibility would be low, and search and rescue operations would be impaired. Lastly, individuals who remain missing would have a higher likelihood of canine units being unable to find their scent. A found scent would lead to a higher likelihood of a found missing person. The following are 3 select cases used to illustrate some of the strange phenomenon that Missing 411
it's not
is trying to
creepypasta.
explain.
There's real cases of people going
On the
missing.
morning
It's
of
not
March
like a
14th,
fake thing. There are people that are
2014,
missing, like a lot of them.
Dr. James McGrogan hiked into the wilderness outside of Vail, Colorado with a group of physicians. He had recently accepted a job as an emergency room physician in Indiana, and he was ready for a wintry trip into the
It does sound
mountains with
similar then.
friends.
That is very much a... I
The
believe this
group
is a
embarked
basis
on
for that too,
Spraddle Creek
Ramen.
Trail toward Iceman Hut. They
Yes,
brought
this is a legit
split
thing.
boards,
So
a
many people
snowboard
have
that
gone
splits
missing.
into two
Like you
halves
said,
to
like
allow for
6,000 people.
cross-country skiing
Some are
and
never
traveling
found.
uphill or touring. The trail was a steep climb through 9 miles of difficult terrain. The area was blanketed in snow, and the path was well compacted and easy to identify. It may have been a difficult trek, but McGrogan and his friends were experienced and well prepared. McGrogan himself was in great physical condition, previously completing a marathon run. He was equipped with a working cell phone, extra battery, GPS tracker, food, and water supplies in his pack. The group stopped to take a break after a few hours, but McGrogan pushed onward. They planned to meet further up the trail, however, this is the last time McGrogan was seen alive. The group continued on the trail after only a few minutes, but they didn't encounter
Someone used to walk on
McGrogan
the
at
road with the
designated meeting
GoPro.
spot.
Signals
upon
in wooded
reaching the
areas
Iceman
aren't always
Hut,
the best.
there was
There's a
still
big thing
no
about
sign
that
of
too.
McGrogan.
Like signals and all that
Eagle
stuff.
Valley Sheriff's Department searched
So,
on foot
when you
and
get out to the
snowmobile,
wilderness, there's not always
Three
towers
helicopters
everywhere or
assisted in the
satellite signals.
search.
So
and they covered over 18 square miles for the next 5 days, until bad weather drove them to end the search. 20 days later, hikers found McGrogan at the bottom of an ice fall in Booth Falls,
oof.
4.5 air miles east from Iceman Hut. The area had already been searched multiple times by search and rescue. Authorities reported that parts of Vale could be seen from where McGrogan's body was recovered. He was found with head trauma and a broken femur,
Ooh,
partially
Jesus.
undressed. He was not wearing his coat, gloves, or boots.
Huh.
McGrogan would have had to climb and descend nearly
Sorry about that.
5,200 feet in steep elevation, requiring a path that likely traversed 10 to 16 miles, switchbacking to
Yeah, that's what I was
safely
saying, Tetsu.
navigate
Yeah,
the
finished
slopes.
with signals of all kinds.
He would have had to cross Middle Creek and fight his way through snowdrifts up to 30 feet tall.
Fuck.
McGrogan meets many of the criteria outlined in the missing 411 profile. He was intelligent and physically fit. He disappeared in mid-afternoon, and his search was halted by severe weather. He was found at the bottom of an ice fall in an area that had already been thoroughly searched, and he seemed to have vanished off a clear trail with no visible tracks. He had removed his boots before the incident,
Which is weird.
and he was in a dangerous and difficult place to reach. Why didn't McGrogan activate his GPS transponder? Politis confirmed the area where McGrogan was found had cellular reception, so why didn't McGrogan dial for an emergency rescue?
Something happened.
Bart Schleier was a practiced outdoorsman, an accomplished wildlife biologist.
Damn,
with
took down that
experience in
ram?
the Grizzly
Jesus.
Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone and the tiger conservations in Siberia. Paradoxically, Schleier was also an avid hunter, and he was prone to spending weeks or even months in the wilderness, bow hunting wildlife. Schleier was last seen alive by the pilot who flew his chartered float plane to Reed Lakes in the Canadian Yukon Territory
Oh,
on
the Yukon.
September
Oh
14th,
boy.
2004.
Now that's a place you really
The
don't want to
plane
go
would
unless you're
return 2 weeks
experienced.
later to pick up the hunter, but he was nowhere to be found. Schleier was well prepared for his trip. He brought 3 Action Packer crates of gear. One crate was filled with canned food that would last a couple of weeks. The second crate was filled with his clothing for the trip, and the third contained his camping gear, including a good tent, sleeping bag, inflatable boat, and more. After he was reported missing on September 30th, Mounties
dead,
from
yeah.
the RCMP in Whitehorse, over 175 miles away, investigated his campsite. They found the remains of a meal at his camp, but the food crate was secured. They discovered his boat a half a mile from the camp, in the brush shore of the lake. It had been secured at both ends in the thick brush. With the weather deteriorating, the Mounties speculated that Schleier had hiked to the Klondike Highway. However, his friends were adamant that this was not a possibility, as he had not contacted any of them. Dissatisfied with the RCMP's response, a friend of Schleier's in Whitehorse, named Dib Williams, returned to the campsite with a friend. They found Schleier's camp. His tent had been knocked down, and they discovered his backpack, bear spray, VHF radio, and knife on site. Williams and his friend returned the next day to continue their search around the boat. Less than 200 feet in the woods, they discovered Schleier's bow with handmade arrows and a buckskin quiver. They found a bag full of gear. Many speculated this was a blind, and Schleier had been sitting on his pack, prepared to call and hunt moose. In broadening their search, the two found a camouflage mask with some hair and blood inside.
Uh-oh.
On October 3rd, Mounties returned to the scene with conservation officers and civilians to begin a grid search.
That guy is dead.
Further searching turned up a baseball cap, camouflage pants, and camera. These were not damaged, scratched, torn, or bloody.
Huh.
Bones were discovered 200 feet away. The teeth were used to identify the bones as those of Schleier.
Holy fuck.
Speculation centered on a bear or
attack?
wolf attack. However, there was no sign of a death struggle nearby. The surrounding area was covered in undisturbed moss. The clothing would have been damaged and soaked with blood. Additionally, scat from bears and wolves nearby were collected and tested. While they did contain bone, there was no sign of fabric. In other instances of bear attacks on humans, clothing is often found mixed with remains in the bear's scat. In other cases, bears will cache their prey, meaning they will bury it for storage and return at a later date. But
Look at that bear.
there was no such cache
Adorable.
nearby. Lastly, bears do
Dangerous
not seek
animal,
to incapacitate
Damn it,
or
they ain't
slay their
majestic
prey.
in their own
They
sense
will
too. Look at it.
simply begin
It's like
to
a puppy.
eat, whether their prey is alive or not. This would have led to a gruesome and messy scene, but searchers could find nothing of the sort. His campsite and bag were left undisturbed, but attacking animals would likely return to investigate, especially for the canned goods. Bears can and will eat through tin cans. Schleier meets many of the criteria outlined in the missing 411 profile. He was a bright and accomplished outdoorsman who was physically capable of withstanding the toughest climbs. The inclement weather of the Canadian tundra impacted search efforts by both the RCMP and Schleier's friends. He disappeared near the Reed Lakes in an area that had previously
Chow Chow
been
is the only
searched
bear
by the
cub you need.
RCMP.
No one lies there,
The
Ramen.
cause of death could not be determined.
Danger flu.
Some speculated that he suffered a bear attack, but
It doesn't
there
seem
were
likely,
no
though.
clear signs of a death struggle, no fabric in nearby grizzly scat, and no tooth marks in the recovered portion of Schleier's skull. Schleier was an avid outdoorsman and experienced hunter with a past of recovering grizzly bears. With that in mind, how could he have suffered a surprise bear attack? How had his clothing been removed without claw or tooth marks? And
Maybe.
with no sign of a struggle or remains nearby, what happened to him in those woods?
I think that's something we've covered before, spontaneous human combustion. I think it
On
wasn't for an
June
Eerie Hours. I
4th,
think that was for Gallery of the
2017,
Unknown. But
Mike Peterson headed out for
maybe
a
we'll cover it
lone
again one
hike
day.
in West
That's just
Yellowstone.
weird shit.
He wore an orange hunting vest and waders.
He did have a
and he
weapon,
was
but it
well
was found
equipped,
like by
packing
his
bear
body
spray,
with no
food,
signs
and
of
a
blood on
firearm.
it.
He began down a
He had
familiar
like a
trail,
big hunting knife.
one he had hiked with his children in the
I
past.
think he had a gun too, but
In
I don't know
fact,
if they found the
he
gun.
was so familiar with the trail that he knew where he would have cell service. Throughout the hike, he texted his girlfriend, Bonnie Sanger, who was at a different area of the park. He arranged for her to pick him up at 6 p.m., and they would start a fire, cook dinner, and relax. Sanger arrived at the arranged location at 6
Hey, Gray.
p.m., but there was no sign of Peterson. She waited for him, and at 7:20 p.m. she heard 4 gunshots in the woods. She called the local sheriff's office, and a search and rescue operation began at 10 p.m. Over 40 individuals participated in the search and rescue, including K-9 units and helicopters. They combed the park in search of Peterson, but severe weather impaired the search, grounding the helicopters for a time.
Yeah, people do go in the woods
It
to off
wasn't until
themselves. I don't
3
think he was
days
going there
later
though.
that
He
they found
was.
Peterson's
He brought a
body
lot
in
of
Beaver
clothes
Creek.
and everything else to go hunting, so
Searchers
it didn't
found
seem like he was
Peterson's
going to off
orange
himself.
vest and bear spray half a mile away from
It
the
seems
river.
really weird. There was no stuff
Upon
of wounds or
further
anything on his
searching,
skeleton,
they
so
discovered
it's
his
really
pack
hard
and
to say what the
firearm in
fuck
a second
killed him.
location. Some speculated that Peterson had been surprised and driven into the water by a bear, but the search and rescue team never uncovered bear tracks around Peterson's body or belongings. Mike Peterson matches many of the missing 411 profile points. He was a physically fit outdoorsman with backcountry experience, and he was familiar with the area. He disappeared in the late afternoon, and his disappearance coincided
Am I going to talk about the
with Jeff
suicide
Murphy,
forest with
another
sweets?
hiker who disappeared from Yellowstone.
I think
in
I've
that
talked
same
about
week.
the suicide forest
The
before
search
too.
for Mike Peterson was impaired
But again,
by
that
severe
was
weather,
possibly the
and
gallery
he
of the
vanished into
unknown.
Beaver Creek.
Oh, all those are
The sheriff's
mostly,
office
some are still up,
speculated
but
that
some are gone because
Peterson
my
had
secondary
crossed the
channel
creek
got
early
nuked.
in the morning, but snow
I'm not
melt
sure.
upstream had dramatically increased
Again,
the
there's
height
subjects
and
I could always
speed of the
recover
water
at
when he
certain
returned.
points. That'd probably be
They
one.
guessed he had been swept off his feet and drowned. But that doesn't explain why Peterson would have left his belongings behind if he planned to return to Spanger. As an experienced outdoorsman, he had enough supplies and means of communication to simply signal for help and wait. While Peterson was recovered, many questions still remain and will likely never be answered. Missing 411 attempts to draw connections between seemingly unconnected cases. It does not provide an explanation or cause behind these connections. However, skeptics and believers alike are quick to jump to conjecture about the true cause behind these cases. Skeptics maintain that these profile points are coincidences due to data selection, and they explain the cases with a number of hypotheses. Victims who are in peak intellectual and physical condition may overestimate their abilities, behaving with less caution than necessary for their circumstances. In frigid temperatures, individuals may suffer from hypothermia and begin to paradoxically undress, a common phenomenon.
Yes, it is.
Their confusion during this time could result in distant travel and bizarre behavior, including the removal of clothing like shoes. Violent criminals may visit or retreat to
Very
national
true that
parks
they do
in
that
search
too.
of
There are a
easy
lot of
victims.
criminals in national
They would
parks.
prefer
The
these
mob being
locations
one of those
because
people
their
that would
lack
go
of
there.
surveillance and witnesses. Victims may have been suffering from depression or mental health issues and may have entered the woods in a final act of surrender. These are just a few of the hypotheses laid out by skeptics of the missing 411 profile.
Suicidality, yeah.
Many believers skew toward paranormal explanations as the cause for connection
Believer
between these
theories.
cases. A number of extra or ultra-terrestrials have been proposed as the
Ultra-terrestrials?
cause of
What the
these
fuck does that
disappearances
mean? Like
and
alternate
deaths.
dimension?
Alien abductors and Bigfoot would prefer the seclusion of the national parks and be startled or threatened by the intrusion of hikers. Some have proposed that cloaked
Glimmermen?
beings stalk the woods,
The fuck?
nicknamed Glimmermen. However, their background and purposes are unclear.
Sorry about that. I was about to mute
Cave
myself, so you didn't have
creatures
to hear that.
similar
But
to the
I couldn't
goblins
read
of
fast enough.
Hopkinsville have been proposed
Goblins?
because Paulides' map of the missing closely resembles a map of the U.S. cave systems in our national parks. Rifts in time and space have been suggested as the cause because victims will
Chris.
sometimes vanish instantly,
Dimensional
almost in front
rifts.
of witnesses, or they will disappear without a trace. Missing 411 doesn't resolve the mysteries behind these cases. It's a lens for us to view the story, to try to understand that which cannot be understood. We are drawn to these mysteries
Glimmerman
because they cannot be
Glimmerman does
resolved.
sound like a Genesis song, right?
Looking for answers, we are only left with questions. That and the memory of those who have gone.
Yep. They're all dead. It's the mole people. Steven Seagal in the woods murdering motherfuckers. Alright, there was that video. So let's move on to the next one, which is going to be a Mr. Ballin video. Here we go.
Something very strange seems to be going on inside of national parks in North America. Every year, hundreds of people go missing in these parks, but these parks are huge expanses of wilderness. So it's not particularly unusual that people might go missing inside of them. But every year, of those hundreds of people that go missing, there's always a few that go missing under very strange circumstances. Either the way in which they disappeared doesn't really add up. You know, someone will be watching or keeping an eye on someone. They'll turn around and then turn back, and that person's missing, and there's not a trace of them, and they're never found again. Or you'll have instances of someone will go missing, there'll be an extensive search, there's no trace of them, and then they're found like miles and miles away in locations that are almost impossible to get to. Now, one man, David Politis, who's a former police detective, he began researching these very strange disappearances inside of national parks. It started when a park ranger actually approached him and said, "Hey, there's a bunch of weird things happening in state parks. You should look into it because you're a former detective." And so after looking into it, he discovered that there were so many oddities around many of these strange disappearances. And he saw there was many overlaps and similarities that he really dove into it. And he's examined thousands of these strange cases. By his count, 10,000 plus hours of research. He's written 4 books. They're all under the name Missing 411. If you Google Missing 411, you'll find a plethora of information about these cases. He has 2 documentaries out. And so
Probably
David,
great.
while he doesn't actually take a stance as to, what's causing these strange disappearances,
Oh, hi,
anybody
Porky.
that follows along with the Missing 411 cases is basically led to believe that something is hunting humans.
Yes,
in
we
North
are getting
America
spooky up
inside
in
of
here.
national
Missing
parks.
411.
It is fascinating. It is terrifying. And I've picked out 5 of the most bizarre cases that I've come across inside of Missing 411. Before we get into those 5 stories, though, if this is the type of content that you're interested in, the strange, dark, and mysterious that I've kind of promised in this video, well, that's what my channel is all about. And I post 3 to 4 times a week. And so if that's your style and you like that type of content, if you could, please gently lambast the like button and then
Gently
please
lambast.
turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into the stories.
Dennis Martin.
On Father's Day weekend, 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin, his
Oh, no.
brother, his father, and his grandfather headed up to the Smoky Mountains to go camping. This was a family tradition on Father's Day, and they were really excited about it. They get to the same campsite they always used. They set up, they have a wonderful first night, they camp out, and the next day, another camper in the area happened to walk by and saw that Dennis and his brother were playing there. And so this camper had kids as well, and he asked Dennis's father, "Hey, would it be okay if I brought my kids by? They're the same age as your sons, and they can just play together." Dennis's father says, "Sure, bring them down." And so the man goes, gets his kids, they come back, and before long, all the kids are playing hide and seek. Now, Dennis's father would say that he had an eye on Dennis the whole time. He was just at a distance, but watching his son to make sure he didn't get lost. And so at one point, all the kids are hiding from the parents.
Okay.
And, at some point, the parents say, "Okay, show yourselves." And all the kids, except for Dennis, show themselves. And Dennis's father has watched Dennis go behind a particular tree. He watched him do it. He was watching the whole time. And so when they said, "Come on out," and he didn't come out, he actually wasn't that concerned because he knew exactly where his son was. And then after a few moments, he yelled to his son directly and starts walking over and says, "Dennis, come out, Dennis. I know you're behind
So
the tree."
Scientology shrimp?
And when he finally got over there, Dennis wasn't there. Dennis's
After
father
Earth?
immediately starts running off into the woods, screaming for his
No,
son.
sorry,
He
what is
actually
it?
ends up running
I forget
almost
what it
2
is.
miles
That's wrong
up
movie.
the Appalachian Trail, just hollering for his son.
Ah, damn,
and
I
he
just
can't
forgot. It's
find
the
him.
L. Ron Hubbard movie.
And then the rest of the family had broken up and was searching the area because they're thinking, like, he couldn't have gone very far. He was literally just here. And Dennis's father had said
Dennis the
before,
Menace.
like, "I watched him go behind the tree. I watched him. I don't know where he is, but I watched him go behind the tree." And so they're searching everywhere, and Dennis is gone. So a huge search, in fact, the biggest search in park history, ensues with 1,500 searchers that included the Army Green
Yeah, that's
Berets. So
Scientology.
the Special Forces got involved.
That shit's made up
They are
as fuck.
combing a 60 square mile plot. They're looking everywhere, and there is nothing.
From a hack writer.
There's no trace. There's no scent. There is nothing
Peddled
connected to Dennis
first
Martin
a
anywhere.
fake New Age
And so they go
workout
back to
thing, then
Dennis's
rip shit
father,
off of
and they're like,
Lovecraft.
you have to tell us what you saw. Again, this doesn't add up. If you were looking at the tree and he was right there, how is it that he has just vanished into thin air? But no one knew. That was it. No one knows what happened. There's
Battlefield
no
Earth.
closure.
Yeah,
He's
that's
just
92, not
gone.
after.
They
Battlefield
never knew
Earth.
what
Thank you,
happened to
Cindy.
him.
I
Years
forgot the
later,
name of the
when
fucking
David
movie.
Paulides was doing his
John
research
Travolta
for Missing
and,
411 and was researching the Dennis Martin case,
damn, I just forgot
he
the other guy's
interviewed other families that
Forrest
had been
Whitaker
at the
in it.
campground
Forrest
at the
Whitaker's
same
good
time
eye.
that Dennis had gone missing. And
He's
one of
like
those
most
families was the
Scientologists.
Key family. And they had asked a park ranger
Man, that
where
movie
they
is
could
so
go
bad.
on the campground where they might be able to see some bears. And so the park ranger obviously said, be careful, but you can go over here to this section of the campground and you might see a bear. And so they head over there and they're looking for bears. And one of their children hears a scream or thinks he hears a scream and kind of directs the family to look in the direction of the scream. And from their vantage point, they could see up onto the side of this mountain where there was, call it sparse trees all over the mountain.
Sparse
so you
trees.
Kind of see in between the trees. And they saw what looked like a bear running along
We all try to forget that
the
movie.
mountainside, but with something slung over its shoulder. Except the interesting thing about this bear was the father was quoted as saying that it didn't really act like a bear. It was acting more like a human the way it was running. It looked, hairy and like an animal, but it was running and dodging between trees. It was holding this, what looked like a child over its shoulder.
Gnosticism shrimp?
It acted almost like a human. And so you have a bear man that
You're
has been
Gnostic now?
spotted by the Key family, and they bring this up to the
I was conquering
that are looking into
galaxies
the Dennis
when you were
Martin
still
case.
learning to
And,
spell your
obviously
name.
The Dennis Martin investigators, they don't take this seriously. They think that they're just, saying some ridiculous thing for attention or whatever it is. So, it never really was entered into the case with Dennis Martin. It wasn't until the missing 411 cases that it was ever connected. But there really was a family that claims to have seen a bear man carrying a child.
A bear
about
man.
an hour
Man,
after
bear,
Dennis
pig, right,
Martin
Porky?
had gone missing in the same area where Dennis Martin had gone missing.
Story 2.
In the
Keith
spring of
Parkins.
1952, 2-year-old Keith Parkins was playing with his siblings outside
Oh, no.
of his grandfather's ranch in Ritter, Oregon.
Oh,
And
no,
when the
Oregon,
kids were all
Porky.
called in to have lunch, Keith was nowhere to be found. And so the siblings and the family went out and did a cursory search looking for Keith. And when nothing turns up, they call in authorities and a full-fledged search is launched for Keith. There's no sign, there's nothing. And 4 miles away from the ranch, they find, several hours later, some footprints that look like they might belong to a 2-year-old. And they start tracking those footprints, and they go on for miles and miles, and then they just kind of stop. And it wouldn't be until the next
The rake
day,
is in Porky's
12
Woods.
miles away from the initial
All along the Oregon
ranch,
Trail.
that they would ultimately find Keith. Surprisingly, Keith, who had disappeared with not enough clothing to be out in sub-zero temperatures with snow on the ground,
Porky is the
and
man
being
bear.
2 years old, he wasn't prepared for a night out. He was found alive, face down, 12 miles away. His jacket and his hat had been stacked neatly next to him, and he
Oh,
had
what the
scratch
fuck?
marks all over his face.
That's
but
creepy.
He was unhurt.
But he's
When
got
asked,
scratch besides the
what
scratch
happened,
marks.
he's 2 years old. He had said a cat scratched him, and he kept repeating that a cat had scratched him. That was the only thing that he could articulate.
A
No
cat
one knew
scratched me.
how a 2-year-old, in the span of 20 hours, could have moved in the middle of the night 12 miles away. Les Stroud, who's a very accomplished outdoorsman, he's the star, he is Survivor Man. He actually, because of this case, went out and tried to actually cover the distance in the allotted time. You have 20 hours to cover this 12 miles. And he couldn't do it. And he even said, it's not possible for a 2-year-old to have covered this distance, let alone survived the exposure to the elements in the time that he was out there. But somehow he
Weird.
did. And, years and years later, Keith was interviewed, because now he's a grown man, he was interviewed about what happened.
I don't think he's
and
gonna
has
remember
no
it being
idea.
2
He has
years old.
No memory of it.
Yeah, no shit.
At
that
the
happened
end
when
of
he was 2 years old.
1973,
He's not gonna have any
19-year-old
memory of
Charles
it.
McCullough, who was an amateur photographer, had been doing a West Coast tour of the United
Mr.
States,
Bear's
going
cellar.
to all the different national parks to photograph beautiful scenery. And by January of 1974, he was in Oregon and wanted to go to Crater Lake, where he
Oh
wanted
boy,
to
Porky,
take
Crater
pictures
Lake.
of Crater Lake. So he
Make
asked his
vodka.
friend, who had an all-terrain vehicle, to take him out to Crater Lake because his van, which was this VW beat up old van, it couldn't have made it out that far. And as his friend is driving him out to Crater Lake, Charles says to him, kind of jokingly, if you don't hear from me in a couple of days, file a missing person report. Sure enough, a couple days later, when Charles doesn't show up, that friend does file a missing person report, and an extensive search is conducted at Crater Lake to find Charles. There's no sign of Charles. There's nothing. There's
nothing.
anything
gone
about Charles. And his father
Charles
actually flew out there and stayed for several months, just constantly searching the area. Found nothing. So nothing is found. So a year later, a couple of backpackers were hiking the area around Crater Lake, and they get lost.
How does he know it was a joke?
And they're well off the trailhead, and they discover a backpack. In the backpack, they found a strange-looking Volkswagen key that anyone that knew Charles McCullough knew that he had this strange key. And so when they found it, it was a distinctive key. And so when they gave it to police, it turned out that it was Charles McCullough's backpack. So investigators went out and started looking in the area that this backpack was found, which was 12 miles off the trailhead.
There we go. That's better.
This is well off the trailhead. And near the backpack, they find what remained of Charles McCullough.
Crater Demon got him.
They found his pants unbuttoned and on a log, as if he was sitting on the log and then just disappeared into the ground. But his pants were still there.
Yeah, that was
Sticking
weird.
out of the pants were his socks, no shoes, and in the socks were his feet bones.
Yeah.
There was no jacket, there was no upper portion of his skeleton. 12 feet away, they find a portion of his skull. And that is the last thing they find of Charles McCullough. And ultimately, it was determined that he died of natural causes. His family was not prepared to accept that, however, when you look at some of the circumstances.
How weird everything was. That doesn't seem like natural causes to me.
His boots. He's missing his photography equipment. His head is detached from his body. He was also 12 miles off the trailhead. And when he went missing, there had been approximately 5 to 7 feet of snow that had dumped in the area. So how did he move 12 miles off the trailhead in 7 feet of snow, especially when you consider he was not an outdoorsy type. And even when he got dropped off by his friend that drove him out there, he even said later on that he felt like Charles was very ill-equipped for the environment he was going into. But at the end of the day, it was left as, sorry, he went missing and he died of natural causes. And that was that.
Crater Lake, one of the few locations
Bart
selling
Schleyer
Crystal
was
Skull
a
vodka.
famous outdoorsman and hunter. He was just one of those people that you could drop into any environment, and he's not only going to survive, he's going to thrive. A testament to that would be he spent months in Siberia.
Holy fuck.
Tracking and catching Siberian tigers.
Puppy.
He was like a world-renowned tiger tracker.
Okay.
He's just like this super rugged, super competent outdoorsman. In September of 2004, Bart books a float plane to take him 175 miles north into the Yukon Territory in Canada for him to go hunt moose on his own for 3 weeks.
Oh, that's that story
He
again.
had all the right equipment. He was obviously extremely
last time we
capable,
saw him,
and
it was
no one thought twice about it.
the
When he
fucking
got
ram.
dropped off,
This
he
time
told
it was
the
a
pilot,
tiger.
"Meet me back here in 3 weeks." And so off he went. The plane leaves and comes back 3 weeks later, and there's no Bart. Now, the pilot knew Bart was like a god in the wilderness, and so he wasn't really concerned, but he went over to where he had been told his campsite would be, and he found the campsite. And it looked like someone was still living there. It didn't look like it had been destroyed at all. And then near his campsite, he found a dry bag, which looked like it had an indent on it, where someone might have been sitting on it up against a tree. And then next to the tree was his bow and some arrows. And it looked like an area where a hunter
me,
might
I
have been
abducted them
sitting
all.
to
Wow,
call
Porky.
in moose, but there was no Bart. Near the dry bag and the bow and arrow, they found Bart's
No,
teeth
experience doesn't stop them
and a
from dying. It's
couple
just
of
weird that the
shards
way
of
they
bone. Initially,
seem
the
to
thought
go
is,
missing
well,
is
a
weird
large
for
predator
like how they
must
would react to
have
things.
Snuck up on Bart and eaten him. Except there's a couple of huge problems with that theory. One, Bart, his friends at least would say, and people that knew him would say, he would never
can't abduct a
get
burrito.
snuck up on by a large predator. He was so accomplished in the wilderness. Like, he was always a step ahead of everything around him. So the idea that he would just be sitting there one day and a bear would just happen to sneak up on him is pretty far-fetched. Also, in the area where his teeth and some of his bones were found, there was no sign of what they call a death struggle, where you're fighting for your life, you're smashing into everything. There's none of that. There's no There's no marking on the ground or in the surrounding areas that a
Got
large
turned into a
predator
box.
had attacked him. Also, his camp had food out in the open.
Yeah.
And if a large predator had come through, like a bear, after it finished with Bart, it would have raided the
Eaten the
campsite,
food, yeah.
and it didn't. And so the way this was left was he was attacked and eaten by a predator. But nobody believes that because that wouldn't happen to
Didn't show
Bart,
any of the
and
signs of it being that.
The circumstances around his campsite didn't really add up.
Yeah. Christopher Tompkins.
In 2002, Christopher Tompkins was working as a surveyor, and he was assigned to this 4-man survey crew that was working in Harris County, Georgia. And they were walking along this road, spaced about 50 feet apart, all 4 of them. And Chris was the last one in line.
Okay.
And the third one in line would later tell investigators and police that as they were walking along the road, he would periodically turn around to just, for a quick second, make sure Chris was still there. Mm-hmm. And as they're walking along with no sound or any indication that anything's happened, he turned around, saw Chris, kept walking. A few minutes later, turned around, and Chris is gone.
Yeah.
The third guy hails the other 2, and they go, and they're like,
what the fuck happened to Chris?
They're looking down the road, like maybe he stopped, maybe he stepped off the trail, but they can't see him. And they go back they start walking down the road towards where he would have been, and they find on the ground a pile of loose change and some of his tools that would have been in his pockets.
That's
and then they see
really
one
weird.
of his boots stuck in the barbed wire because there's a little barbed wire fence that was running the length of this road.
Okay.
One of his boots was stuck in the barbed wire, and there was nothing else. They searched the area. They're looking everywhere. There's no sign of him, and it didn't make any sense to the people in this survey crew, especially the guy who was third in line, who was like, I literally saw him a minute ago. And there's no way he could have gotten away without me hearing or seeing some indication of where he was.
Yeah,
but there
that's
was no
weird.
sign of him, and he was gone.
It was just
so after
gone.
this huge investigation, they don't find any sign of him, and that's it. They're just like, yeah, he's gone.
You're gone.
They did find, 9 months later, they found his other boot near a swamp 900 yards away, but it didn't provide any more clarity into what happened to him.
That is weird.
However, if you look at the pile of loose change and things that were in his pockets that were on the road, it indicates that at some point he may have been turned upside down. And if you think about the entirety of all of these strange stories where the idea being someone could be hunting humans, just picture in your head Chris Tompkins walking along and something flipping him upside down, dumping the contents out, and then being gone in a matter of a minute where no one can see where they went. These 5 stories are just a fraction of the literal thousands of others that are covered in the Missing 411 series. And while many people believe that all of the cases in Missing 411 and any others that ultimately are considered strange inside of these national parks have a rational explanation, even if we don't know what it is. Whereas another group believes that this Missing 411 phenomenon is an indication that something is hunting humans in the national parks across North America.
Something, Porky. Why you gotta be this way?
Some say aliens, some say something else. But paranormal is certainly the other camp in terms of trying to explain away what these strange disappearances are from or what's causing them. Whether or not we ever find a definitive conclusion remains to be seen,
box.
but I would love to hear what you think is going on inside of these strange cases of Missing 411, whether it's a rational explanation or maybe something paranormal or some other option. But I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. And that's going to do it, guys. If you enjoyed this, please, if you could, gently lambast the like button and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my 3 to 4 weekly uploads every week. If you want to get in touch with me, please DM me on Instagram. My handle...
Dude, I'm moving past that, Mr. Ballin. Your shilling's done. Going back to Paradox.
We are drawn to stories about the missing. We want to find meaning, but none can be found because tragedy defies reason. We are trying to understand. However, there are some cases that cannot be understood. Not completely. There are countless disappearances in the national park system of the United States.
and other
There's
places.
no way of knowing how many have vanished because
Like in
there's no
Canada, too.
central database or registry to track their cases.
The alternates.
And without a unified index, it's difficult to identify patterns, make connections, and find resolution. Within weeks, search efforts begin to wane and media attention
And it continues.
fades.
Yeah, missing people
The
cases happen
names of
all the
those who
time.
have gone missing
But
are
it's definitely
spoken
very
by
high
fewer
in
and
national
fewer
parks.
people, until their name is joined to a litany of other names, those who have gone missing. Some conservatively estimate that at least 1,600 people have vanished on
1,600.
public lands
Jesus.
and remain missing under unexplainable circumstances. One of the leading civilian researchers, David Paulides, began to research these disappearances. He attempted to identify
David
and explain
Paulides,
cases
also known
that could
as
be
Mario
explained
Mario.
by animal predation, mental illness, criminality, or voluntary disappearance. Then he examined the remaining outlier cases and discovered that they shared uncanny and unexplained commonalities. These shared characteristics became known as the missing 411. These profile points have changed over the years, so the following is a composite summary.
Alrighty.
Victims who go missing are usually on either extremes of the intellectual spectrum, ranging from the highly intelligent to those who are struggling with mental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Victims who go missing are usually
I know he's
on
repeating himself like he
either
did in the last
extremes
video,
of the
but it
physical
happens in a lot
spectrum,
of these because it's,
ranging
oh,
from
we're
the
watching
very
this for
fit
the
and
first time,
active
here's
to
this.
those who are disabled or sedentary.
Or just to,
Disappearances
reinvigorate your
often
memory.
occur in the mid to late afternoon, and they also occur in geographical clusters. Severe and inclement weather coincides with the disappearance or the beginning of the search. Victims go missing near large bodies of water, boulder fields, or berry bushes. If the victim is recovered, they have no memory, or they have surreal narratives to explain their disappearance. Their causes of death are often undetermined. Bodies are frequently recovered in areas that have been thoroughly searched by search and rescue teams.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, the search and rescue teams will be unable to find any tracks, or if tracks are found, they somehow vanish mid-path. Canine units will be unable to pick up a scent, or they will not pursue the scent if found. One or both shoes are missing from recovered
So is it
bodies.
the aliens or Fed
Similarly,
aliens?
bodies are
The
recovered in
ALAMOs of the
areas
government.
that are difficult,
The ones
if
that
not
work in plain
impossible to
sight.
reach,
The aliens
especially
you'll
in the
always
time
know.
elapsed.
And will never
The
leave you.
following are 3 select cases.
That doesn't sound like it's nightmare fuel or anything.
This is Volume 2 of Missing 411 National Park Disappearances.
Is this a retard abductor? That's oh shit, damn CIA. The Down syndrome dolly.
David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty went camping on the North Nahanni River in the Northwest Territories of
Well, I
Canada.
guess Dave Horsey
on
didn't
June
have
12,
a picture at all.
2005.
Guess he just never
The
existed
two
then.
friends traveled to the area on a wilderness hunting trip, and they stayed 125 kilometers north of Fort Simpson. They were described as experienced bushmen, comfortable in the rugged outdoors. They were set to
Experienced
explore
bushmen.
the Nahanni Park Reserve, which was christened in 1976.
Okay.
Its name comes from the indigenous language of the Dene people, who occupied the area for thousands of years. Their oral history contains many references to the Naha tribe,
The
which
Naha
means
tribe.
the people over there. The Naha lived in the mountains and regularly descended into the lowlands on raids. However, it's been recorded that these people mysteriously and abruptly vanished from the area.
Huh.
Geographically, the reserve contains part of the Mackenzie Mountains and Virginia Falls. It is largely composed of backcountry terrain, thousands of square miles that have been largely unexplored. Even now, some areas remain accessible only by air, water, or arduous hiking. Rod Gunderson, a mutual friend, offered his cabin to Horsey and Hardesty and when he left them on June 12th, both men were still alive. 4 days later, he noticed smoke from small fires as he returned to find the two men missing. When he tried the doors to the cabin, he found they were locked. Inside, it was still well supplied with food and firewood. Concerningly, the men had left their firearms behind.
That is concerning.
On June 18th, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were called to investigate. They could find no reason for why the men had abandoned the security of the cabin without their firearms. Search teams were called to the area and they focused their efforts on the Nahanni River. They employed canines and aerial search units equipped with thermal imaging, and their search continued until June 23rd with no results. Joseph Horsey, David's stepbrother, participated in the search party, and he claimed to have found strange things at the Gunderson cabin. He told reporters, quote, "There were bullet shots all over the place, and there was a gunshot in the floor," unquote. The search operation was continued by friends and family, and on June 27th, David Horsey's body was found in thick brush. A corporal of the RCMP, Al Shepard, confirmed that the area had already been well searched several times. Strangely, Horsey's body was found with burns on his hands and arms. The search was initiated again, and the authorities returned with canine units on July 5th. On July 8th, a search team found Hardesty floating in the Nahanni River, nearly 20 kilometers away from the cabin. This area had already been combed by searchers in canoes and on foot. After autopsy, Horsey was determined to have died of hypothermia, and Hardesty had drowned. This case fits several of the missing 411 profile points. The two men were in good physical condition, as they were avid outdoorsmen. The victims went missing near the Nahanni River, which became the focus of the search efforts early on. Both bodies were recovered in areas that had already been thoroughly searched. Despite the remote location, the men had left
Purple Haze.
no trail exiting
Have you
the
ever
cabin.
heard of the Rocco
And although
Basilisk?
search
No, I highly
teams
recommend
had
watching a video if
explored
you
the
want.
areas
Total
where bodies
mindfuck.
had been found,
I have not.
canine
thank you for the,
units
recommendation for
never
plays.
uncovered their scent.
I will give it a watch sometime.
On September 13th, 2013, Joe Elliott Blakesley and Amy Linkert traveled to the Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho, located in the Snake River Plain. It's one of the youngest volcanic areas in Idaho, and it contains the best preserved flood basalt area in the continental U.S.
Okay.
It's a vast ocean of lava flows, and it can make for treacherous terrain. Elliott Blakesley was an Idaho native. She earned her BS and master's degree in zoology
What is a boot?
before earning her MD. She was a physician at the Snake River Correctional Institution, and her friend Amy Linkert was a retired teacher. The two were in their 60s, but they were active and familiar with the outdoors. Linkert's niece described the two as avid hikers and survivalists. On September 19th, they were spotted at a campground nearly 18 miles away. The two didn't return on September 20th as planned, and when Joe failed to show up for work on the 24th, her coworkers reported her missing. Their vehicle was discovered at Tree Mold's Trail, and it contained their dogs, cell phones, and other supplies, indicating the two women expected to only be away for a short time. Family members assured investigators that the women would not stray far from the vehicle or break off the trail. At the time, the federal government was shut down, but 10 furloughed Park Service rangers searched on foot anyway. An official search didn't begin until nearly a week later. Canine teams and foot patrols joined the 10 searchers as the government exited shutdown. The National Guard sent 2 Black Hawk helicopters and planes participated in aerial searches for the two women. They spent 6,000 volunteer hours.
Dude, I just saw your icon change
traversing
in Discord. It's
difficult
Malekith with that
terrain
troll
and
face.
unpredictable weather. In the summer months, The sun bakes the black lava flows, and surface temperatures can reach as high as 170 degrees Fahrenheit.
Woo!
On September
Fuck
25th,
that.
the search area was expanded, and searchers discovered Amy Linkert's body 2 miles off the trail of the rugged lava rock. An official cause of death was never released. It was later determined that a
170
storm
degrees.
hit the area around the same time the women had
I
arrived.
knew you would like that, yeah.
Only a few days after they were reported missing, another thunderstorm delayed search efforts.
Okay.
It wasn't until nearly a month later that they found the body of Joe Elliott Blakesley. She was 2.5
Are these
miles
women like
from
bold
the
eggs,
vehicle.
or?
Elliott Blakesley was found near the open edge of a
'Cause
lava
they are not
flow,
pretty.
and recovery of her body was delayed due to difficult terrain and poor weather.
Yeah, that's almost boiling
Her
temperature,
body
yeah.
was in an area that had been thoroughly searched
170.
by helicopters over the previous month.
170
Later,
degrees.
rescuers determined that canine search teams had been within 200 yards
I
of her
think
body.
it's at 170.
One of the handlers
Like, holy
recalls
fuck.
the dog pursuing a scent in the area, then seemingly losing or refusing to continue. What drove these experienced outdoorswomen to leave their supplies and dogs
That ain't no
in their
woman, that's a
vehicle?
bruh.
Why did they strike out from the safety of the trail? This case fits several of the missing 411 profile points. The victims were well educated and familiar with the outdoors.
It's
Their
something with how the lava
disappearances
fields
weren't
can attract the
only
sun
ones to occur in the area.
because of the black,
Richard Willis Bendele disappeared from
how
the
they
area
are,
in
and the
1996.
the surface of them looks.
He was an experienced
they're not
outdoorsman
real,
who
like-
had undergone a recent divorce a year prior.
Oh, okay,
but he was
divorce.
happy and thriving. He called his mother via a portable phone after a hike.
They did
and
look
he
pretty
told
old.
her his truck had broken down. He suspected that someone else
what I was
was
trying
in
to
the
say
area,
is that I
and they
think
had
it's
tampered
because
with his
the-
vehicle. That night, 6 inches
lava
of
rock
snow
just
fell.
attracts the sun and it
Upon
puts down
searching
something
the
safe.
area, only 2 gloves and 1 black tennis shoe were recovered from Richard's location. When police discovered his vehicle, they found the battery could turn over and one of the windows was smashed out. The search party included volunteers on foot, canine units, planes, and helicopters, but Bendele was never heard from again.
Oof.
Inclement weather occurred near the time of the disappearance and delayed the search efforts. The cause of their deaths was left undetermined. The location of both Linkert and Elliott Blakesley's bodies were in areas that had already been well searched.
Okay.
Canine units could not find a scent for Linkert, and they seemed to temporarily pursue Elliott Blakesley's before resigning from the effort altogether.
Alright, let's see the next
Terrence Woods Jr. was a freelance filmmaker who was working for Raw TV, a production company filming the Gold Rush series for Discovery Channel.
one. Okay.
The show followed David Turin as
No,
he
those don't seem
explored
suicide.
disused mines across the western U.S. On October 5th, 2018, they were filming at the Penman Mine in Idaho County,
Okay.
near the ghost town of Oro Grande. They were in the larger Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest when Woods disappeared during a day shoot on location. He has not been seen since. Woods grew up in Maryland, near Washington, D.C., but moved to London to pursue a master's degree.
Weird.
Upon graduating, he worked on high-profile British shows, most notably The Voice UK. He
Okay.
was familiar with frequent traveling and shooting on location. He had participated in previous shoots in the wilderness of Turkey and Alaska,
And you didn't
and
go
his
missing there,
backcountry
surprising.
experience was non-negligible. He had no
Alec got him.
history of anxiety or depression. However, friends say he was not excited to travel for this shoot. In the early morning of his disappearance, he texted his father that he would be cutting short his time on the shoot by a number of weeks. His father thought this was also uncharacteristic, and Woods provided no explanation. The afternoon of the disappearance, Woods was talking with a miner before excusing himself to use the restroom.
A minor.
A nearby associate producer,
they're
Simon
filming
Gee,
mine stuff
said he
about
had
Gold
an
Rush.
odd feeling shortly before discovering Woods' headset on the ground.
Huh.
Worried the man had fallen off a nearby cliff, the associate
that is a
producer
bit
approached the
warning.
edge and saw Woods
And worry.
sprinting down the steep incline and disappearing into the tree
fuck?
line of the nearby forest.
Just
The
left,
associate
sprinted.
producer told Woods' father that Woods had been running faster than he had seen anyone run before. A few of those on set tried to pursue Woods, but they stumbled on the incline and difficult terrain, returning bloodied and bruised. Simon Gee told Woods' father, quote, "Due to my professional SAR training, I stopped running after him out of fear that he'd be further scared."
He lost
unquote.
his shit. Something weird
Gee's
happened.
story was further corroborated by a local woman.
But moving that
Woods
fast
left
is
behind his
strange, too.
backpack, including a camera bag, pens, over-the-counter painkillers, cough drops, charger, tactical knife, and stun
Maybe he
gun.
got Mountain
However,
Madness.
he had his
Who
phone
knows?
in his possession when he disappeared.
Huh. So
Woods
they
was
should be able to
reported
track
missing
that.
evening, but the search party couldn't be mobilized until the following day.
Mm.
Canine units, ground teams, all-terrain vehicles, and helicopters with FLIR, or forward-looking infrared, were dispatched to search the area. Canines followed his scent down the cliff and through the forest to a road at the base of the cliff. There, his scent went completely cold. The search continued for 7 days, but no trace of Woods was ever found. The search teams claimed that if he had been hurt or injured, they would have found him. In the middle of the search, heavy rain and snow hindered air support.
Oh no.
On the same day, in October of 2018, Connie Johnson, age 76, disappeared from the same area.
Huh.
She was working for Ritchie Outfitters as a camp cook. She was 5'7", 140 pounds, and she had formerly worked as a U.S. Forest Service Ranger. More recently, she had taken to leading tours through the back country. She was in the Big Fog Mountains area at a camp that was only accessible by foot. A group of hunters left her and radioed the next day. They received a response from Johnson, but couldn't understand her message. They returned to the camp 2 days later, and Johnson and her border collie, Ace, were missing.
Oh no.
Upon the report of her disappearance, search teams were mounted on foot and horseback, with 6 canine units and aircraft, again equipped with FLIR devices. The active search was suspended on October 16, 2018, but her dog arrived at a ranger station 3 weeks later.
The doggo made it.
After he was fed and checked, they flew the dog back to the search area, hoping he could lead them to Johnson.
That the dog
The
could, yeah.
undersheriff reported that the dog had no interest in following any scent. No trace of Connie Johnson was ever found. These disappearances match several of the missing 411 profile points. Terrence Woods Jr. was well educated with backcountry experience,
Yep.
and Connie Johnson was a former Forest Service Ranger.
Yeah.
Both disappearances occurred sometime in the late
I'd say
afternoon,
physical extremes because one
and
was
they
a younger
occurred
dude
in the
and the
same
other was an
area
old
of
woman.
the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. Additionally, search and rescue teams were unable to discover any tracks for Woods or Johnson, and canine units were unable to pick up a scent.
For me there.
These are just 3 cases of the likely thousands of national park disappearances. The missing 411 profile resolves no mystery. Looking for answers, we are left only with questions. For potential theories and additional disappearance cases, please visit the first video in this series, Missing 411 National Park Disappearances.
Alrighty. Let's move on to the next Mr. Ballin video. Oh, actually, no, that's not it next. Here's something really, really weird, I guess. The following raw footage retrieved from the camera of a local photographer had been missing since Friday, 29th October 2021. Police have uploaded this video to his YouTube channel in hopes that the subscribers will all be able to provide some information as to his whereabouts. Police are also appealing to witnesses, many have seen him or not, in the Calif area, near Windermere, on Friday, 29th October 2021. Viewer discretion is advised. Here we go, raw camera footage. This person is missing. I don't know if they're still missing or not. This was a year ago, but let's watch. guess this is in England.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, and of course, welcome back out into the Lake District. Slightly different one for you today. I'm actually going on a little bit of a ghost hunt. You may or may not have heard of the story of the Cliff Crier. If you haven't,
Did you see the missing Discord moderators and the Discord trail cams? Yeah, I saw that.
Now. So, once upon a time, there was a monk that lived in Furnace Abbey, basically.
Fucking selfie stick.
And his job
Scottish? Yeah, I think Scottish, actually.
Basically, try and save the souls of the ladies of the night, shall we say, the
whores, okay,
around that area. And he actually fell in love with one of them who lived up round Cliff Heights. Ended up coming up here, pursuing her. She spurned his advances, and he basically went nuts and ran around crying and wailing and all that kind of stuff, and eventually died of a broken heart, but carried on wailing from the grave. So anyway, this story kind of spreads around Lakeland, and it becomes common knowledge. And
you're a missing wizard, Harry.
The guys that run the ferry from the east side to the west side of the lake of Windermere, to not go and pick anybody up from the west side after dark, because basically that's when the crier comes out.
Okay.
So they did that, or they didn't do that, until this new guy started. Young buck. Didn't really care for any of those silly stories. Thought it was a load of rubbish. And one night heard the bell ringing, rowed across.
This is on the channel Black Crag, by the way.
It's a rowing boat in those days, back before the motorised ferry, and basically disappeared. Came back the next day, completely white as a sheet, a little bit crazy, and just dropped down dead.
That's how Padme died.
The ferryman decided they need to do something about this, so they brought in one of the monks from, probably from Furnace Abbey again. This is before the dissolution of the monasteries, by the way. So this is like Henry VIII times, before Henry VIII times.
Okay.
And he banished the spirit to a quarry up on Cliff Heights. And it is the only ghost in the country that exists on an OS map. So you can actually see it on an OS map. Crier of Cliff, or the Cliff Crier, I can't remember what it is.
Cliff Crier.
But it is on the map there. So I'm going to go up there via a couple of nice tarns, good photographic opportunities, Moss Eccles Tarn and Wiseen Tarn. I'm going to go into the woods there and head over to where he was supposed to be banished by this monk. See if we can see him. Wouldn't it be cool if we see him?
I'm not going to see any ghosts. You're going to become one because you're going to go missing.
Okay, so I'm just parked up in Farsori and heading up towards Moss Eccles Tarn, which is the first port of call, so let's get going. Hey, Hurdy.
Sheep.
Right, this is Wiseen Tarn. I think this is absolutely beautiful here, I really do.
It does look
nice. I mean, here's a tarn here. I don't know if you can see it on this camera. There's got swans on there, and there's a little boathouse as well. Beyond that, you've got, I think it must be Pike of Blisco, and then Langdale Pikes are there, but they're all hidden in Clag, so we can't see them today. It's a real shame. But this is a stunning place. It looks a bit dry at the moment, though. Not that much rain recently, so I think quite a lot of it is kind of receded a little bit. But beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I love that little boathouse. There's so many potential photographs there. in the right conditions, right light and what have you. Today is not one of those days. Nice. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack on, keep going up along the path here and into the woods, because we're here to go and find a ghost, remember? Let's go and do it. All right. Okay. Just about to head into the spooky woods once I've navigated
Spooky woods.
a swamp of doom.
Seeing the witch yet?
Getting close now. Lots of beautiful larch trees around here. Again, could be quite good for compositions. But
So this guy is dead. I had no idea he's missing.
kind of odd spooky stuff.
He's been missing. Again, I don't know
So
if he was
these
ever
woods
found or what.
really
That's
do
just
give
what
me
it
the
says on
creeps.
this.
And they've cut quite a lot of them back over the last few years.
He is
Quite
a
a lot of
missing person.
deforestation work. But there's still certain patches where it's really deep and dark and quite scary. Certain times of day. But
Distortions of words.
we'll see.
Just says missing on the video
Let's get in
description.
there.
Same thing we saw in the earlier intro. He's been missing. I mean, it could be real, it could be fake. I don't know, but I'm just watching it.
So last time I was here, all
Nice
this
pines.
was just a wasteland. The time before that, it was full woodland like this. But then they chopped it all down, and it was pretty
grown
horrible
back.
to seeing all the little stumps and just deadfall everywhere. But that's grown really quickly. I can't believe that.
Pine. Pine grows pretty
So
fast,
yeah, in a
bro.
couple of years, that'll be full woodland again, like that. Maybe not a couple of years, but you know what I mean. Right, so might not be able to see on this camera, but I'm heading over towards that mast over there, the radio mast or whatever the hell it is, and then the quarry is just beyond there. So we'll go and take a look. Eek. All right, just approaching the mobile phone masts, radio masts, cell towers, whatever the hell they are. It's starting to rain as well, unfortunately. But if you take photographs of Langdale pikes from places like Brantfell,
So the
over on the
Lorax got him.
Windermere side, you quite often see this in shot. Quite iconic and ugly.
Quite iconic and ugly.
Kind of scary looking as well.
That's always a good
Nice
thing.
experiments
It's
and
kind of
stuff going on
ugly.
here. Weird technological experiments with ghosts and stuff. Right, so it's not far from here actually. I've taken the wrong path. I'm actually cutting through and I shouldn't really be cutting through. The other path was pretty much impossible to find. So I'm going to get across this wall and then I'll be right on where the crier is. Let's go and have a look. There it is.
I mean, it's good footage.
Right, I think we
It's a
need to head
camera.
over this way. Here's a gap in the wall. Let's head over. We'll check the map out as well now.
Actually, checking the YouTube channel. This is the guy's channel, the guy we're watching here. And it looks like he's uploaded videos since. I don't know if this was for Halloween is why he did this, so it may be fake, but no, I'm kind of interested just watching it.
Apparently, I saw I read a few years ago that he was banished to a quarry, but
Because I
don't
see
know
him
where that
like
quarry
uploading
is.
like
There's
7
nothing
months
marked on
ago,
the
7
map.
months ago, 6 months.
But I am
so
right
he was
on the
fine. So
point
return
now
to the
where it
Haunted
says-
Woods, the Lake District.
Crier of Clafe.
Let me
So he's around here somewhere.
see something. I'm gonna guess it was just for Halloween is why I uploaded it.
It's kind of spooky. I think all woods are spooky anyway, but
Oh yes, he
when
did
you
this.
know-
Yeah, he just did this for Halloween.
Look at these
He did this as like a spooky thing
branches
for
here.
Halloween.
But when you know
Okay.
that there is actually a
Ooh,
story
clickbait. I know.
of a ghoul
Hey, this filming's really good.
that
I'll
lives
give him
around
that.
here. It is.
We are
it
gonna
is
move on though,
quite
because it's not real. We're gonna move. Maybe don't fuck with ghosts that live there. Yeah. All right, back to Mr. Bullen.
People go missing inside of national parks all over North America.
I mean, I didn't
But of those
expose it was
hundreds of
super
people
real, so
every year,
I just saw missing.
a
I'm
few
like,
of
does this
them
really
go
happen to
missing under
someone?
very strange circumstances. And a man
yeah,
named David
Heads
Politis,
up,
who's
you
a
know,
former police
hats off to him.
detective,
That footage,
has
he's
made
a
it
really
his
good
mission
cameraman,
to
despite
look
his
into just
selfie stick.
the bizarre disappearances that are occurring all over North America in his series that's called Missing 411. So there are thousands of these strange cases inside of Missing 411 that David Politis has poured tens of thousands of hours of
David
research
Paulides.
into. And he puts them into books, into documentaries, and so there's really no shortage
Gene the
of
Snake
strange
Oils. Like I
cases to
said, I
look
didn't
at.
really check it.
But as
Then
I
went to check the
begin
channel
my own
right now. I was like,
research
oh,
into
he gets
Missing
uploaded a lot of
411
shit. So
and learn
obviously,
about these different cases,
just something for
I
Halloween.
have been pulling groups of
Should've been
stories
a
that
good
stand
sign
out
that it
to
was
me
probably
as being
fake after that.
particularly interesting or just fascinating.
You never know,
or
though.
just strange.
As
And
YouTube.
I'm making videos to highlight
Yeah, the
those
footage was
stories.
good.
And so I've already done one video like this where I highlighted 5 stories that I thought were particularly strange. You can find that in the description. I left a link to that video if you want to check that out.
This is part 2
and
of
so
Mr.
today
Bullen's
I'm going to
thing.
be looking at another 5 cases from the Missing 411 project that are just totally weird. But before we get into today's stories, if you're interested in the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right channel.
A diligent
because I
Gene.
post 3 to 4 times
I
a
didn't
week.
totally make this
All
whole thing
about
up like
the
an hour
strange,
before
dark,
we
and
went
mysterious,
live. No, I would
like
never
I'm
do
promising
that.
to
I,
deliver
prepped
today,
hours
and if that's
beforehand
your
and
deal,
checked every
I would ask you
source.
to please
I
gently
totally did
uppercut the
that.
like button, and then also subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of those 3 to 4 weekly uploads. All right, let's get into the story.
Totally. You guys believe that, right?
So this first one really takes the cake for just being strange. You have a family that basically has 2 experiences that are somewhat connected. You're going to have to be the judge if they're connected or not, but very strange. On October 1st of 2010, this family who decided to remain anonymous for the Missing 411 story, they go
Okay.
camping, and it's a 3.5-year-old boy, his older sister, and then the mom and the dad. And so they go camping at Mount Shasta in California, which is a popular camping site. And the family
Mount
loves to go
Shasta.
camping there. And so they're all sitting around the campfire, kind of hanging out at the campsite. It's getting late in the evening, maybe 5, 6 o'clock. And the sister would say that she was looking at her brother, turned away for a second, and then looked back, and he was gone.
That's
and it was
creepy.
so sudden that she actually went to go look for him and couldn't find him. So she went and told her mom and her dad, and they start calling for their son, and they're looking all over their campsite, and he's gone. Authorities show up, and they launch a full search. And for 5 hours, they have hundreds of people scouring this area, not only the campsite, but the surrounding areas, and there's no trace of this boy. 5 hours later, they
You
find
saying it
him
wrong?
laying in a thicket on a trail that had been searched multiple times. And it wasn't like hidden.
Mount
The thicket was like
Shasta?
right by the side of the trail. So if you've searched this trail, you've found this kid. So meaning he couldn't have been there
That's
during the search.
completely
He must
wrong,
have
I'm gonna guess.
arrived, and then they found him on this trail. Everybody was
Shasta?
so
Is
happy
that how you
that
say
they
it?
found this kid and he wasn't physically harmed that no one really looked into the fact that it doesn't make any sense that
Got
he
to go
was
see you
here.
next time on
How did
Dragon
he
Ball,
get
Gene.
here? Where
Later,
did he
Mr.
go?
Self-Destruction.
Where's he been?
Have a good one,
No
man.
one thought about that. They were like, we got the kid back. We're all happy. The parents are happy. Everyone's ready to just move on. And so the kid goes to the hospital. The doctor looks at the kid and says, you know what? He's fine. This is obviously a traumatic situation, but he's fine. You can take him home. And so the kid goes home with his parents, and pretty quickly the family went back to normal. They were obviously super grateful that they didn't lose their son.
Yeah, thank
About
fuck.
3 weeks after this whole ordeal,
Uh-oh.
the boy is with his grandmother, who he called Cappy, and he looks at Cappy and he goes, I don't like the other Cappy. And
Oh.
so his grandmother, the real Cappy, she looks at him and she was like, what do you mean? Now,
That's
remember,
creepy.
this is a 3.5-year-old boy. Language skills, not the best, okay? But this story that he tells
Gene
his
is in
grandmother,
real life Logar, yes.
he had previously
Shasta.
told his father, but the father had written it off as the ramblings of a 3.5-year-old. It wasn't until the grandmother told the father about the story that he was like, I've heard that story. And so the boy says, you know, while he was camping, he turned and he saw Cappy waving to him to come with him. And so he loves Cappy and he goes with Cappy, and Cappy leads him up a hill to
Uh-huh.
a cave. Now the whole
Oh, no,
time,
that's
the real
creepy.
Cappy, who wasn't there, she was not with them camping. She's thinking, oh my God, someone who looks like me, abducted this child. So she's listening, horrified. He said, she brought me up to a cave. And when we got into the cave, he said there were spiders and purses, like women's purses.
Oh,
and
boy.
He turned to look at Cappy, and he said that her head was glowing. And it was when he realized this is not Cappy. This is the other Cappy.
The other
and
Cappy.
He said the other Cappy kept asking him questions, but he didn't know the answers. And so the other Cappy got frustrated and told him to leave and pushed him out of the cave. And he said that he left the cave and wound up in the thicket, and that's when he was found. And so when Cappy goes and tells the father, and the father says, I've heard that story, they're like, that's so weird. Do you think there's any truth to this? Is there someone that looked like me, Cappy, that took the boy away? And so as Cappy and the boy's father are talking,
a fucking like spider
Cappy feels
demon
compelled to share her own strange story about being on Mount Shasta. Because prior to this, the family, I think the way they were looking at what happened is the boy wandered off and he returned 5 hours later. But with the boy's story being kind of corroborated by, the father who heard the same story, Cappy's like, I got to share my story now because I don't know if it's connected, but I had a very strange experience on Mount Shasta as well a year ago.
There, he said it wrong again.
Shasta. With her friend. And they go to a campsite on Mount Shasta, the same place the boy disappeared.
He keeps changing it.
Saw the other Cappy. And so Cappy says that night, they're
Jorogumo, it sounds like it, Nathan. A little bit.
And she notices a set of eyes in the woods that were glowing. So glowing red eyes.
That's fucking terrifying.
And,
but
Cappy
everything kind of
and her
keeps
friend,
glowing
they go
eyes in
camping all the
darkness.
time. And so they
A
know
lot of
there
stuff
could
does.
be predators and animals all over the place. And so they grab their flashlights and they shine in the direction of the eyes. And the eyes dart away and they don't think anything of it. Over the course
Mount
of the night,
Shasta-Cola,
the eyes
Mr.
would keep
Shasta-Cola.
showing up all around them. And every time they'd shine a light in their direction, they would vanish. Cappy and her friend are unable to get the light on this thing. So they don't know what it is. And so they're very uneasy about it. But they decide, you know what? We're psyching ourselves out. It's just an animal that's interested in us. And so they go to bed.
They think.
And they sleep in their own... She slept in a tent, and he slept in a camper. And they go to bed. And the next morning, Cappy wakes up, and she's laying on the dirt outside of her tent.
Oh, Mount
And immediately
Shasta-Cola.
she has pain in the back of her neck. And so she reaches back, and she grabs her neck, and she can feel there's a cut on the back of her neck.
That's
She doesn't know what it is, and she looks up, and her friend is on the ground outside of his camper, face down as well. And so she gets up, she feels horrible, like sick, like violently sick, in fact, and she kind of staggers away over to her friend, who is laying there, and she can see, too, that he's got a mark on his neck, and he gets up, and he's like, what happened? And they assumed that they had been bitten by, a poisonous spider. That's actually what they believed, because it was a little puncture wound on both of their necks, and that it had caused them to be sick and delirious. They'd wandered out of their camper and their tent, and they'd wound up on
Porky
the ground.
didn't have another reason to
But
hate
now,
insects, this is
as
a big
Cappy
one.
was retelling the
Spider
story, she was
people.
like, I don't know how to connect that experience with what happened to the boy, but I can't help but feel like something weird's happening on Mount Shasta. And it would turn out that, maybe they weren't wrong, because Mount Shasta is like a hotspot for missing 411 strange disappearances. And in fact, our next story is another Mount Shasta case. In 1999, Carl Landers was a very experienced hiker, climber, whose passion in life was, on the weekends or any chance he got, was to go hiking and climbing and camping. That was just what he did. He was in great shape. He was enjoying retirement. That was his happy place, is being on a mountain somewhere in California, hiking around. And he had two very close friends that he would go hiking with just about every chance he could. In 1999, in the summer, Carl decides he wants to summit Mount Shasta. And it's something he had attempted to do before, and he had been unsuccessful. And this time he was going to
Let's summit that
so
mountain.
Mount Shasta, it's high enough. It's about 14,000 feet. That, it's not uncommon for people to stop at this point called Lake Helen, where hikers can adjust to the altitude, because it's certainly possible to get sick from being at altitude if you don't
sickness.
adjust to it, or if your body doesn't respond well to it. And so their plan was get to Lake Helen, camp out for the night, and then summit the next day. So they head up in May of 1999, the three of them. They get to Lake Helen, and they set up their camp for the night. It was clear that Carl already had some sort of altitude sickness, because by the time they reached Lake Helen, he's weak, he's sick, And he figures, I'm going to try to sleep it off tonight. I'll see how I feel in the morning. And so all night, Carl is just super sick. It's a horrible night for him. And so early the next morning, Carl, he's a real stubborn guy, and he really wanted to climb Mount Shasta. He says to his two friends, hey, look, I'm just going to get a head start here. I've been up basically all night. I'm going to just get up the last stretch here, summit this mountain, and then come back down and be done with it. And so his two friends, they didn't like the idea of splitting up, but Carl's an experienced guy. And I mean, he's only covering a distance of maybe 650 feet. Like, this is not some epic distance he's covering. It's basically like a day hike. So Carl leaves on his own. He leaves his backpack at the campsite, and his two friends would watch him as he kind of bent around the mountain and went up towards the summit, and that would be the last time they ever saw him.
Oop,
the
gone.
two friends would attempt to summit as well about 30 minutes later. One of them apparently had gotten sick overnight and said, look, I can't do this, and he stays at the camp. He's like, I'll be here. You know, we've already split up from Carl. Why don't you also go on your own, summit yourself, and I'll be here. I'll wait for Carl. I'll wait for you. The friend that does make the summit, he goes up. He follows the same trail, the short distance up to the summit, gets to the summit, and he hasn't seen Carl. He's not shocked. It is a little strange that they wouldn't have passed on the way, but he's thinking, you know, anything could have happened. Maybe he sat down somewhere. I don't know what it is. And then comes back down expecting to see Carl back at the campsite.
Nope.
So he gets back to the campsite at Lake Helen where the other sick friend had not left. He was still there. And he says, hey, has Carl come back? And the friend's like, no, didn't you see him on the way up? Did you lap him? Like, what's he doing up there? And he's like, no, I went up. I didn't see him on the way up. I didn't see him at the summit. And
Carl got kidnapped.
And they're thinking to themselves, like, thinking about the trail itself. It's incredibly open. There's almost nowhere to like fall. There's no crevasse. There's no sheer cliff.
No.
You know, there's almost no vegetation really to obscure you. It just didn't make any sense that you could vanish. A huge search is launched. They never found anything. There was also 50 to 100 people in the area that day, and nobody knew where he went. No one saw him. No one had any idea what happened to him. They interviewed everybody there. No one knows what happened to Carl. The only clue that we have of Carl is the backpack that he left at Lake Helen before he made the summit run. Other than that, for 20 years, we have no clue what happened to him. None. So
Weird.
This next story is really creepy. One of the strange phenomenons that you get inside of these missing 411 stories is you have people that go missing really suddenly, like as if they were pulled away at high speed and just ripped off the face of the mountain. And this story is one of those stories. In 2010, Eric Lewis was 57 years old. He was an extremely experienced mountain climber.
Okay.
And he had two very close friends that were also very experienced mountain climbers. And they decided that they wanted to go hike Mount Rainier in Washington State, which is a huge mountain. And they were doing a climb that was fairly technical and fairly dangerous. And it required the three of them to be tethered together on the same cable. And so as they're making this ascent of Mount Rainier, you have friend one in the front, friend two in the middle, and then Eric Lewis is the third guy on the line all the way down. And so the way it worked is the first climber, friend number one, if he wanted to rest, the other two climbers would keep climbing up to his position and take a rest with him. So he was kind of in charge of setting the cadence of how quickly they were going to climb this mountain. And so over the course of the day, the first climber would stop periodically, and then the second climber and Eric would make their way up and wait and relax. All day that was happening. And then one time they come to a stop, and there's been nothing weird happening. Nothing's happened to this point. Everything feels very normal. The first guy stops, the second climber gets up to him, and then Eric doesn't show up. And so they
last guy.
pull on the line, and it's very light. And they pull it up, and the rope has been cut.
Oof.
Like, Eric's gone. And they're like, okay, only in an emergency would you cut the line. And so they just start immediately descending because they're like, well, it just snowed. It'll be very easy to track his footsteps. If he cut the line, he must have had a reason. Let's follow his footsteps to wherever he went. But the only footsteps on the mountain were the ones walking up, attached to the rope. Basically, Eric had been walking up, leaving footprints right behind the other two, and then the footprints just stopped. There aren't footprints that go back down. It was like he was pulled off of the mountain. And so they start walking down thinking they're going to run into him, but they don't. The weather gets bad enough that they ultimately abandon the hike. They go down and they're like, geez. They tell the authorities and they're looking everywhere and they can't find him. And then they discover this creepy cave that's like 200 feet down and away from where they were hiking. That would have been very hard to get to. Inside of this ice cave is Eric's gear.
What the fuck?
No Eric. And they've never found Eric's body. But for that gear to get into the cave, it wasn't just, hanging on the edge. It was inside the cave. But there was no footprints leading to the cave. There's no footprints anywhere. It was just like inexplicably, Eric's gear winds up deep inside an ice cave 200 feet away, and Eric's body was never recovered, and no one has any idea what happened to him. So the last story is actually really two distinct stories, but they together make up a particular phenomenon that occurs inside some of these missing 411 cases, and that's when some creature takes a child and actually protects them. In 1868, a 3-year-old girl vanished abruptly from her father's camp in northern Michigan. The father noticed the girl was gone. In hysterics, he enlists the help of a couple professional hunters that were there with him. They go off looking for this girl, and after a couple of hours of looking, they start to hear what sounds like her voice. And she doesn't sound particularly distraught, but it's definitely a child's voice. And so they kind of cut through this big thicket, and out bursts this massive bear-looking thing that runs away from them. And they didn't shoot it or anything. They just saw this huge animal run away, and they're thinking the worst because they're hearing this child, and now they're seeing this huge animal that looks like a bear running away. And they go through the thicket and they find this girl who's totally unharmed, who was in this kind of clearing within the thicket where clearly this bear creature had been with her. And the father's elated. He scoops up the child, and the child seems unhurt. And he asks her, like, "Where have you been? What happened?"
Skinwalker?
She says, "Oh, Mr. Wolf took me here, and Mr. Wolf was feeding me berries, and Mr. Wolf was playing with me." Maybe it was a bear or a wolf or something, but some animal had taken her, brought her into a thicket, and had not harmed her. And so the other instance occurred in 1955 when a family that was made up of mother, father, and their 8 kids were staying in this camp in Montana. And they had all these different tents set up for all their kids. And some of the older kids were staying in one of the tents with their 2-year-old sister, Ida Mae. While the parents were working and the kids were doing whatever they were doing. And so these older kids are sitting deep inside the tent, and near the entrance to the tent is where Ida Mae, the 2-year-old, is sitting. And the tent is open, like the flap is open to the tent. And as they're sitting there, the older kids would later say that a bear wandered past, reached in, grabbed Ida Mae, and scooped her up into its arm. Now, a bear does not do this.
No, it can't do that motion.
They described it like this. The bear was holding Ida like this and ran away on 3 legs instead of 4. And so the kids are freaked out because they just saw a bear take their 2-year-old away. They're basically hysterical. They sprint up to their mom and dad. They tell them what happened. And the parents just have no idea how to react to this. They obviously get in touch with authorities. They launch the search. And as they're doing the search, police are asking the kids, like, describe to us again what you saw. And they're like, it was a bear that was, like, holding our sister like this. And they were like, you got to be more descriptive because bears can't do that. Was it a person? Was it a hairy person? And the police just didn't buy that it was a bear. And so 2 days go by and they haven't found this child. And so the family obviously is thinking the worst. They're absolutely grief-stricken. And then one of the searchers finds the girl. And they find her about 300 yards away from the camp. She was inside of a very intentionally built structure. It was a crudely built fort. Right against the riverbed, and inside it was like a den, and she was in there, and she was totally unharmed, and she was perfectly fine. And they take her out and they ask her, like, what happened? And she's 2, but she says, Mr. Bear fed me berries. Mr. Bear kept me here. Mr. Bear cuddled me. That's all we have. We don't know what this creature was, what bear is able to pull its arm in like this, but she felt totally unthreatened by it, and to this day, we don't really know if that was a bear or something else, but whatever it was.
I'm going with Skinwalker because they can change into animals and they're still human.
These stories are just a fraction
just from mythology, of course. I don't
thousands
know, like,
of strange
that's
cases
weird
that
that does
Paulides
happen then.
covers in his
I don't know
Missing
what to make of
411
that.
project. So if you enjoyed this video and you might want to see more content just like this, I would encourage
skinwalkers.
you
We're,
to gently
again,
uppercut the
originally
like
people,
button,
so...
and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my 3 to 4 weekly uploads of content just like this. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is johnballin416. I'm also very...
Alright, Mr. Ballin. We got this guy next. This is Matthew Sordo. He's talking about 5 creepiest missing 411 cases. We might hear repeats, but let's go.
In plain sight, one that you probably weren't even aware of. North America has some of the most vast areas of wilderness anywhere in the world.
Yes, we do.
Many of these regions cover thousands of square miles and have been established as national parks. Each year, people disappear in these parks. Some are eventually found with unnerving tales to tell, while others vanish without a trace. Retired police officer David Paulides has been documenting these disappearances across the United States and Canada for years, and he's come to the frightening conclusion that there is something connecting these events. Out there in the wilderness, something exists that we simply cannot comprehend, and it's taking people for an unknown purpose. These are the 5 creepiest missing 411 cases. The Stephen Kubacki case. This disappearance is one of the strangest among the missing 411 cases. It began in February of 1978 when a student named Stephen Kubacki headed to an area called the Lake Michigan Triangle. This is a vast region, and while not as famous as the Bermuda Triangle, it's a place filled with mystery. Going back to at least 1891, when a schooner named Thomas Hume vanished there alongside her crew, there have been many notable accounts of mysterious phenomena taking place there. When Stephen Kubacki headed to this strange...
Look at this! Look at this. Heads up, we've detected copyright audio in your video. Your stream may be temporarily blocked. I guess we can't watch this video then. Maybe it's the music, maybe it's actually on his end. Oh well, we gotta wait then. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Susan. We'll move on to the next Pandox video. Oh well. We got more videos. We actually have quite a lot still, so we'll see. We'll probably We'll probably end up being a 3-hour stream, which is a rarity more. So no. But we'll see. We've got quite a few videos left. Let's see how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 more videos. So counting this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, that's counting this. So 7 after this one. Still quite a lot. And they're longer form videos, so haven't got a big thing besides that one so far, so we should be good. Bald head copyright. Possibly not on his fault. Could be the copyrighted music. Cyrano can be pissy about people using his videos if you aren't part of his inner circle. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, now I do. Now I do. I didn't know. If that's the case, I'll probably edit that part out. When it comes to actual things, or if I get a notice of it. I didn't know that at all. You don't know from a lot of these people. So, I guess that didn't have a copyright thing on it. And some YouTubers, man. Some are perfectly fine with me using their stuff and are actually happy I do. Others are just like, no, you can't use this. I kinda can, but, you know, whatever. Technically, you don't own a copyright on something you're reading off a fucking Reddit or public source. Hate to break it to you. Not to mention a lot of them like it when you use the videos because it gives coverage of the channel. It's actually kind of free advertisement for a lot of things too. It's not me stealing, I am adding creative commentary of my own to it as well. YouTube has forgotten that a lot, so we have a lot of other things too. Alright, anyway, moving on to this next Pandex video. This is volume 3 of Missing 411. Let's watch.
National Park is located in northern Washington state, and it's known as the deadliest national park in the country.
Some trendsetter, all he ever wants is
3
copying off
hours
the top 10
outside
list,
Seattle,
making
the
some
park
fake-ass
boasts lush vegetation
expressions with
and
that, I see.
alpine peaks. However, danger lurks among the mountainous terrain, limited roads, and scattered outposts. There has been an unprecedented increase in the number of visitors to our national parks in the last few years. Tragically, this will likely mean an increase in the number of those who go missing. Previously, it was estimated that over 1,600 people have gone missing in our national park systems. However, there is no central database for these cases, so there's no way of knowing the actual number of those who have vanished. David Paulides, a former law enforcement officer and investigative journalist, began to compile and profile these cases, eventually developing
system,
the Missing 411. For those interested in a complete history of Paulides, the Missing 411 profile, and potential theories, a link to the first video in this series can be found in the description below. The following are 3 select cases of those who have disappeared in the North Cascades National Park. Rachel Lacaduc.
And I think it can kind of
Tom
go without
Simon
saying
Seth,
YouTube
and
most of the
Richie
time as
Collins.
well. I'm literally
This
saying this for just,
is
you know,
Missing
you guys and
411
just,
National
you know,
Park
fucking
Disappearances
all the moderators or
Volume
anyone
3.
else that watches my shit. None of this shit belongs to me. Comment number. Used to be all about that YouTube comment tube, all that shit. Remember that? Remember those days, YouTube? They're not gone, they still exist. There's people that still do that shit today. It's what I've done since.
Rachel Lacaduc was a 28-year-old
Lacaduc?
from Moses
Lacaduc?
Lake, Washington.
Oh, that's an
She
unfortunate
was
name.
5'4", 130 pounds, recently separated from her husband and living with her father. Although times had been tough, Lacaduc seemed in good spirits. On October 17th of 2019, she packed a backpack with her clothes and sleeping bag. She drove her white Jeep Cherokee to the Hidden Lake Trail in North Cascades National Park. She
Okay.
registered her hike at a ranger station, parked her vehicle at the trailhead, and struck out for the Hidden Lake Lookout Cabin. Her plan was to spend the night in the cabin for her 28th birthday.
Wow.
The day after, she planned to meet a friend in Bellingham, but she would never arrive.
Nope.
The trail was a little over 8 miles in length, but climbed a steep 3,300-foot elevation. Around 4 p.m., 2 hikers encountered Lacaduc about 2.5 miles into her hike. They warned her that the trail was obscured by snow further ahead, and they had turned back due to poor conditions. They recalled that Lacaduc seemed to be poorly dressed for the hike, wearing only thermal tights and a long-sleeved shirt. A storm
Weird.
hit that afternoon, and when Lacaduc didn't show for her plans in Bellingham, her family reported her missing. Search teams began quickly, but heavy precipitation and fog impacted their efforts. They struggled even to reach the lookout cabin, and when they finally did, the undersheriff reported that Lacaduc had likely never made it. Search efforts continued for 10 days with 137 volunteers, spending roughly 2,000 man-hours. Canine teams, foot patrols, and aerial units all participated in the search. Lacaduc's remains weren't discovered until August 14th, 2021. Her sleeping pad and backpack were discovered under a tree, 3 hard miles away from the road and well off the trail. The results of the autopsy have yet to be released.
Okay.
Lacaduc's disappearance meets several of the Missing 411 profile criteria. The time of her disappearance was in the late afternoon, and it occurred in the geographical cluster within the North Cascades National Park.
Get that out of the way, there we go.
Severe and inclement weather coincided with her disappearance and interrupted the search. Near the Hidden Lake Trail is a large body of water. Search and rescue teams were unable to discover her tracks, despite disappearing into fresh snow. Lastly, search and rescue dogs were unable to pick up her scent on the trail.
Alright. Next.
Tom Simon Seth was a 66-year-old man from Mount Vernon. He was described by friends as very athletic and familiar with the outdoors. After retiring from a career in education, he took up hiking with encouragement from 2 of his closest friends.
Okay.
Simon Seth was familiar with the Hidden Lake Trail. He had previously tried the trail multiple times, but he was always deterred by the snow. Less than a year after Lacaduc's disappearance, Simon Seth tried the trail again on May 22nd. He told his wife he would return by 7 p.m. that night. 2
That didn't
hikers
happen.
on the mountain encountered Simon Seth on the trail. Just as with Lacaduc, these two hikers had turned back because conditions were worsening further ahead. It has been speculated that Simon Seth likely followed their footprints and made a choice to turn back as the snow worsened. His wife reported him missing, and two friends began to search the area that night. They had mountaineering experience and over 20 years of search and rescue experience between the two of them. They knew Simon Seth didn't have the equipment to survive the night, and they hurried to the site to find his car still parked at the trailhead.
Oh.
They searched the area until midnight, then slept nearby until the earliest sign of daybreak. Search and rescue teams from Skagit and other nearby municipalities participated in the search the next morning. Even units from the U.S. Border Patrol and Navy participated in the search. Helicopters from Spokane County flew the area while ground teams combed the difficult terrain.
Washington?
Search and rescue efforts were interrupted by snow and impaired visibility. However, they continued their search for days, looking for signs of an avalanche or particular tree wells where Simon Seth could have been swept away. On July 29, 2021, the Snohomish County Sheriff's helicopter team recovered remains that are thought to be those of Simon Seth.
Okay.
However, identification is still pending. The case of Tom Simon Seth fits several of the missing 411 profile points. He was described by friends as athletic and familiar with the outdoors. His disappearance occurred shortly after encountering the two hikers that afternoon. He disappeared from the same Hidden Lake Trail in North Cascades near the same area where Lacaduc disappeared. Snow and impaired visibility occurred around the time of his disappearance and during search and rescue efforts. The Hidden Lake Trail is also near a large body of water. Search and rescue teams were unable to find any tracks from Simon Seth. Lastly, search and rescue dogs were unable to pick up any scent. On April 30th, 2019, detectives arrived at the Colonial Creek campground in the North Cascades National Park after receiving a report from National Park Service rangers that a vehicle had been parked in the area for several weeks.
Oof.
The vehicle was a Honda Element that belonged to Richie Collins. Collins was 6'1" and 275 pounds. He was a father and a 58-year-old veteran with 23 years of military service and experience in Border and Customs Patrol.
All right.
He was not known to be a camper or a hiker. He had high blood pressure and a bad knee.
Yeah, so
the vehicle showed clear signs of not having left the area, and detectives discovered the key on the roof with no other sign of Collins.
That's weird.
On the passenger seat, a map of the Cascade Mountains was open. While press and news reports are limited, Brittany Collins reported that New Halem Rangers searched a 7-mile radius around the vehicle, bringing cadaver canine units as well.
Cadaver canine.
The Colonial Creek campground has a reservoir over 300 feet deep, and it was reported to have been dredged in the search for Collins' body.
Okay.
After speaking with Collins' daughter, detectives discovered that his large collection of firearms was also missing.
Uh-oh.
Over 35 weapons had been removed from the home.
Holy
the
shit.
gun cases themselves had been
Was
left
he meeting
behind
up with
and strewn
fucking,
about
like...
as if the place had been ransacked.
What the fuck?
Brittany Collins believes his collection was stolen and his car had been ditched in the area by the perpetrator or perpetrators. Collins' brother, Randy, reported that the apartment was in absolute disarray upon entering. This was uncharacteristic for Richie, who was fastidious in nature. Collins was described as a loner, often keeping to himself. It wasn't uncommon for him to go days or weeks without being heard from. Reports of the last sighting of Richie place him with a small book bag leaving his home. But the timelines
Dakota
are
parts
mixed,
of Arizona would
placing
get
the
snow
sighting in
because it
early
goes up to
March
mountainous
or
regions.
Late April. It
Northern
was later
Arizona, I'm
discovered
sure
that
they
the
get
gun
snow.
safe had been pried open, but detectives theorized these pry marks were made by Collins.
Oh, himself, ooh.
A professional estate manager and trustee took over Collins' property, but in an unfortunate twist of fate, they quickly sold all his belongings and home. On July 6th, several children discovered partial remains near the 4th of July campground in North Cascades. It was 5 miles away from the parking lot at Diablo Lake, where Collins' car was found. Nearby were some of Collins' belongings, which were used to identify him. However, his head was missing.
Ew.
The autopsy has yet to be completed.
Yeah, that sounds like cartel, my guy.
While unique, the case of Richie Collins shares many similarities with the missing 411 profile. He was an overweight and disabled veteran, unlikely to pursue an extensive hike in the North Cascades National Park. The time of his last sighting was reported to be midday. Several other disappearances have occurred at Diablo Lake. In October of 2020, Alexander Pish disappeared after setting up an easel to paint a landscape. His remains have never been recovered.
Let me just see.
Additionally, the Diablo Lake campground is less than 30 miles away from Hidden Lake Trail, where Lacaduck and Simon Seth both disappeared.
Against Washington, so it's the border patrol between Canada, but there's a lot of...
was at Diablo Lake, near a large body of water.
Yeah, it's Washington.
His cause of death has yet to be determined.
If not cartel, then there's definitely shitty criminals, I'm sure, on the border with Canada in certain places.
Around his vehicle.
Probably Mexicans. I mean,
Similarly,
cartel and
cadaver
mob and all that other
dogs
shit could be up
uncovered
there.
No scent of Collins during their search. The tragic disappearances of Rachel Lacaduck, Tom Simon Seth, and Richie Collins are shrouded in mystery. The missing
I would say they're
411
connected, and I
profile
would
does
say
not
criminal
solve
activity for
or
probably all of
explain
them.
their cases.
Well, not actually, no,
It
not
only
all of them.
connects
Those other two.
Looking for answers, we are left with
The first
only
one, she
questions.
just seemed ill-prepared. The second guy seemed like he maybe found something he shouldn't have, and the third guy definitely was coerced by some criminals to do something. Anyway, we'll be getting onto, Volume 4 at some point, but not yet. Let's get back to Mr. Ballin. Oh, no, not Mr. Ballin. First, this. Strog, you post this in the Spook House. It's from Barely Sociable, the book tied to 7,500 disappearances. 75,000 disappearances. Excuse me.
Today's video is brought to you by Hunt-A-Killer. Now, judging by the fact that my channel is basically dedicated to discussing all kinds of mysteries, today's sponsor is really a natural fit for this channel. And that's Hunt-A-Killer, which is a subscription service that gives you everything you need to solve a new and interesting mystery every month. With each box, you'll go through piles of documents, evidence, audio recordings. You'll learn the details of a story, a crime, suspects, and the many complicated details that weave them together. And you can sort of think of it like a personal escape room delivered to your door. You can play with family, friends, or if you're like me and you're not the most sociable of the bunch, you can also play solo. And it's a good excuse to do something different besides scrolling endlessly on your phone each night. And with certain boxes as low as $25, it's a great deal for the amount of entertainment as opposed to spending money going out. And with part of the proceeds for every box going to the Cold Case Foundation, your fun you have playing Hunt-A-Killer will also contribute to solving real-world cases as well.
Yes.
So ultimately, you'll have a fun game night, it'll contribute to a good cause, and thanks to the folks over at Hunt-A-Killer, today you'll get an even better price. Just head to huntakiller.com/sociable.
Cindy has already subscribed to Hunt-A-Killer.
Once again, that's huntakiller.com/sociable, and use code sociable so they know I sent you. Thanks again to Hunt-A-Killer for sponsoring today's video.
Alright, let's watch this, Strog. Barely Sociable presents a short documentary. All these people are missing. Man with unknown identity convicted of stealing someone else's identity for more than 40 years. Murder victim turns up alive after 31 years after disappearance. Missing Indianapolis man found living under a dead man's identity for 23 years later. Multiple identities for suspected stylish disappearance raised questions. How did Nassau's County suspect get licensed for under 5 different names? Love the production. Air Force officer missing for 35 years. Fox Files man missing in Ohio used fake name in Minnesota. There's that. No, that's Minnesota. Fugitive living under false ID arrested in Florida after 35 years. North Carolina teen who went missing in 2001 in Ohio using false identity. False identity. Father discovered 23 years later with new name and family. Video. Oh, let's go back. It was lagging there for whatever reason. FBI lab would unplug the case over 75,000 disappearances. To date, many others still remain missing. Chapter 1. Bull Rough.
The year is 2003. A woman by the name of Lori Erica Kennedy had just met a man by the name of Blake Ruff at a Bible study in the eastern part of Texas. Shortly after, they hit it off, start dating, and that relationship would eventually lead to a marriage.
Okay.
While they were excited to take their relationship to the next level, when push came to shove, Lori made one thing clear. She did not want a wedding, or even an announcement in the paper, instead electing to quietly elope with only a pastor present.
That shirt thing
While
that
this
makes
seemed
it so
a bit
can't
weird
really
to
see what
Blake,
it looks like.
it wasn't enough
Really
to stop him from
That's what it looked like
proceeding.
to me.
After all, Blake noticed that Lori was a secretive person, not willing to comment much on her past life, as well as often filling in the blanks vaguely in regards to her previous experiences.
Because that's not crazy.
She had once told Blake that she had a rough childhood, burning all of her photos from that time. She claimed her father was a failed stockbroker, and that she did not have any siblings. Blake, being a matter-of-fact and trusting person, seemed to take her at face value and presume nothing of it. However, as time would progress, Lori's secretive nature seemed to weigh on the relationship. After marriage, their immediate goal was to have a child, which after multiple attempts at having children, they had not been successful. While eventually Lori was ultimately able to have a child in vitro in 2008, shortly after, it's reported that her mental state seemed to decay. She seemed to be incredibly overprotective of her daughter, not allowing her in-laws to even hold the baby, and despite her being incredibly secretive about her past, she would apparently go to great lengths to track down every detail regarding the Ruffs family, going as far as to research specific things like family recipes. But on the other hand, she took absolutely no interest in talking to the family at family gatherings.
The fuck?
Eventually, Lori cut all contact between the child and her in-laws. Her inability to blend with her in-laws caused strain in the marriage, in conjunction with her secretive past, which ultimately caused Blake to file for divorce in 2010. Lori retained full custody of her daughter, and Blake moved back in with his family. Subsequently, during the months after her breakup, Lori's condition seemed to worsen. She began harassing the Ruffs, sending threatening emails, stalking them, and she stole a pair of their house keys. And a neighbor of Lori's had reported seeing her rambling to herself, pacing back and forth outside of her home. Reportedly, Lori's daughter looked thin. In an attempt to console Lori about the situation, Denny, a neighbor of hers, had offered to take her to church for counseling. And according to an article from the Seattle Times, it would state, "She was frantic, about to the point of incoherence," he said. "From that point on, I never saw her focus again." Denny suggested Lori come to counseling at the church where he served as a pastor. She brought in notebooks in which she rambled about, quote, what was wrong with her and how she could get him back, he said. As Lori sat down to talk, Denny couldn't help but notice her hands. They were, quote, the longest hands I'd ever seen on a person, he said.
Hands.
And they were always moving. She'd fidget with her hair or hold her hand out and gaze at it. Then she'd turn it over, gaze some more, and finally put it back in her lap. Her hands were important to her for some reason, he said. Lori spoke in circles, covering the same ground over and over. She'd say, quote, this is what's going on with Blake and me. And the next sentence was, quote, this is what's going on with Blake and me. It would go on like that for an hour. When she had a particular thought, her mind was stuck on it, he said to him. To him, it seemed like an obsessive-compulsive disorder. Blake said he remembered her taking medication for ADHD or Tourette's syndrome.
Oh no.
Blake came in for counseling sessions too and brought along his brother, David. It was strange, Denny said. David did most of the talking as if he was translating for Blake. In the end, the counseling could not repair the marriage.
Obviously.
This entire situation came to a head on December 24th, 2010. Lori had reportedly taken the drive on Christmas Eve morning from her home in Leonard, Texas. She had traveled a whole 125 miles to the Ruffs' home in Longview, Texas.
Oh no.
When Blake's father had opened the garage that morning, he reportedly found her car idling, where she had apparently passed away as a result of her own doing.
Oh, yeah.
The cause of death was an apparent single self-inflicted shot.
Holy fuck.
From here, they found 2 notes, an 11-page one to her husband, and one for her daughter, for her to open when she turned 18. The police opened both notes, and while they have never been released publicly, they noted that they were clearly from someone who was mentally disturbed. Hereafter, the family apparently wanted to know more about Lori's past, and after her funeral, the family would take a trip to Lori's home, and they found the contents of her entire house in disarray. Papers were scattered, trash was stacked, laundry was thrown out, countless dirty dishes remained, and hidden inside her house was a single lockbox. After the lockbox was eventually pried open with tools, it would reveal various documents pertaining to Lori's past. As it would turn out, she had gone under multiple different names, and inside the box was the birth certificate of one Becky Sue Turner, a 2-year-old infant who had passed away in a house fire.
Oh.
They found various scribblings on her notes, such as things like 402 months, which was believed to be the length of a possible jail sentence. They found the contact information for a disbarred attorney by the name of Ben Perkins in California. He said he had no memory of ever meeting Lori. As they sift further, they found a letter of recommendation from one Roger Steinbeck, printed on stationery from a 5-star hotel in Thailand. This letter of recommendation was completely fabricated. Now, the family quickly sought help from various individuals, including one individual from the Social Security Administration. Nearly every lead was a dead end, however, but they did figure out a couple of things. Investigators learned that Lori had requested a copy of the birth certificate of Becky Sue Turner in 1988, and that same year it was used to obtain a state ID in Idaho. 3 weeks after that, Becky Sue Turner appeared before a judge in Dallas and had her name legally changed to Lori Erica Kennedy. After changing her name, she then applied for her Social Security card. Subsequently, she'd then get her GED and go on to college, until she'd file for bankruptcy and then graduate. Someone who knew her around these years had claimed that she had worked as an exotic dancer to pay for college. She had apparently graduated the University of Texas with a degree in business administration. And now, as stated previously, investigators had hit a dead end at every turn. And in an attempt to aid the investigation, the Social Security Administration had worked with the Seattle Times to publish a story to get help from the public. The story was republished again and again until some breakthrough could be made, and while Lori's story became an online sensation among mystery aficionados, over this time many theories ranged far and wide. Was she a spy? Was she someone who had done something terrible? Or was she running from someone? It wouldn't be until 2016 that we would get an answer. That's when Colleen Fitzpatrick, a nuclear physicist turned forensic genealogist, would read an article about Lori's mystery in the Seattle Times and reached out to her family to help piece the puzzle together. Even though they did not have access to Lori's DNA at the time, they had the next best thing: Lori's daughter's DNA. Colleen submitted Lori's daughter's DNA sample to 23andMe and conducted a genealogical family search. The website's results stated that a man by the name of Michael Cassidy was probably Lori's first cousin. Colleen reached out to Michael through 23andMe.com's messaging service, but he never replied. Years later, another close match was made on Lori's DNA that also connected to Michael Cassidy. After spending months building a family tree of the Cassidys, she speculated that Lori's mother was one of Michael Cassidy's aunts. This revealed the true identity of Lori Erica Ruff.
What was her name?
Her real name was Kimberly McLean, and shortly after, her mother would take a DNA test to confirm. But it's worth pointing out that after this occurred, she declined to comment about the reason that Kimberly had left. Kimberly's uncle was willing to talk a bit more though, and he stated that between the homemade family dinners each night and vacations, that she had a relatively normal suburban childhood. Though by the time her parents divorced in 1986, Kimberly's mother remarried shortly after, where she went on to live with her new stepdad in a different town in Pennsylvania. This is reportedly when the troubles started to happen with Kimberly. Within a year, apparently, she couldn't adjust to the new house and school, and close to her 18th birthday, she had simply left and told her parents to not look for her and assured them that they would never find her as a result of her changing her name twice. Now, it's worth considering that this story about her leaving home in 1986 is just what the uncle had to say from his point of view. And while this case was technically solved, it's still incredibly difficult to say exactly what motivated her to change her name. Keep in mind, it was 2 years after Kimberly ran away that she would actually get the name Becky Sue Turner. Furthermore, naturally, you have to ask, how does a 18-year-old girl leave home and suddenly have expertise on how to dodge the guise of Big Brother, not showing up in any kind of database, leaving no paper trail, and not to mention the implications of requiring resources to travel the United States to put this new identity into play? I think it's safe to say that we're missing some crucial details about this story.
Oh yeah.
This begs the question, was Lori acting alone? Did she run off with someone? That remains unclear. It's hard to get a full picture of what went on without any kind of evidence. Beyond stealing an identity, Lori doesn't appear to have committed any serious crimes aside from that. The theories have ranged far and wide about Lori/Kimberly.
Well, she made
During that 2-year period, had she committed some heinous crime under another identity? Or was it possible that she was running away from someone or something that she was frightened of? If you recall, Lori was adamant of no public announcement being made about her marriage, meaning that her changing her last name would have fallen just slightly farther under the radar. I think it may also be worth considering if the story we're being told by the press is actually the truth, or if the Ruff family was actually being truthful about the actual reasons for the breakup. Because one very interesting detail seriously begs that question. On the other hand, what nobody seems to have pointed out is that there are some inconsistencies. According to the Freedom of Information Act request papers pertaining to this Social Security investigation, they appear to have caught the Seattle Times author in a lie. And I want to remind you that the Seattle Times was essentially doing this story for the Social Security investigation. Longview Police Department believed that Jane Doe was prepared to harm her in-laws, but when she discovered that they were not home, she took her own life. Assuming that the Ruffs were not home on Christmas Eve morning, the entire timeline of events that we're given in this Seattle Times article is completely off. Additionally, when this was brought up to the author of the Seattle Times article, who has definitely seen the police report, they would flat out deny this particular detail.
Wow.
But I digress. Because while Lori's case is interesting, it's actually not unique.
Nope.
And while there was some speculation with the original Seattle Times article that Kimberly may have solicited the services of an identity broker, it's only until you look at other stories similar to this one that you start to notice a trend.
Joseph Chandler.
July 30th, 2002. 65-year-old Joseph Newton Chandler had been found dead by suicide in the bathroom of his tiny apartment. His body wasn't found for over a week, and by which point it was so badly decomposed, police were unable to obtain fingerprints, and they could not find any kind of fingerprint on anything else in his house. 3 months before he had passed away, Chandler had purchased a firearm at a nearby store. He had also just been recently diagnosed with colon cancer, perhaps choosing to go on his own terms, but $82,000 was left in Chandler's bank account. He did not leave any kind of will. Checking through the emergency contact to find any kind of kin, it led to his sister, Mary, but the emergency contact led to an address that was an empty parking lot. Investigators had searched for Chandler's next of kin and soon discovered that the man wasn't who he claimed to be. And it's also worth noting that Chandler had kept a packed suitcase, seeming to indicate that he was ready to go at a moment's notice. He had stolen the identity of an 8-year-old boy who had passed away in a car crash on Christmas Day in 1945. In a similar turn of events, the story would make it out to the press, and internet sleuths would theorize about who Chandler really was. But in spite of
killer?
this, the case went cold for over a decade. By 2014, when U.S. Marshals took over the case, they learned that Chandler had undergone a medical procedure in the year 2000, and at the hospital, they apparently still had his tissue sample. This DNA was compared against modern databases. And in a similar turn of events, they then contacted Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, the same forensic genealogist from earlier. As a result of the forensic investigation, they were able to make a breakthrough. Joseph Chandler's original identity was Robert Nichols, and after interviewing his son, authorities were able to get some insight into his past life. Nichols, born in 1926, made his true age at the time of passing 76 years old.
Okay.
Nichols was also a veteran who served in World War II. He received a Purple Heart. But after returning home from the war, he moved on to a normal civilian life. He was married with 3 children.
Okay.
While settling down, he got a job at General Electric as a draftsman, but in a rather bizarre turn of events, he would randomly leave his family one day without much explanation, stating that, quote, in due time, you'll find out why.
In due time, you'll find out why.
This led to a divorce shortly after, and Nichols leaving their home in New Albany, Indiana, to head to Dearborn, Michigan, to also work as a draftsman. He would subsequently get laid off, and on March 9th, 1965, Nichols would send a postcard to his parents from Stroud, Oklahoma, claiming that he was heading west. On March 20th, 1965, he would send another letter from Richmond, California, near San Fran, stating, "Please don't worry about me. I'm well and happy. I will write as often as I possibly can to let you know how I'm doing." And his last ever communication was with his eldest son. But it wasn't any kind of letter, and instead he had just sent him a penny with no context, and in this final postcard it came from Napa, California. And after this final cryptic message from him, the family would never hear from him again, and he was reported as a missing person. It wouldn't be until 13 years later, in 1978, that Nichols assumed the identity of the already dead Joseph Newton Chandler III. After gaining a copy of the child's birth certificate, he secured a social security card, he applied for credit, and within the next 24 years, like a chameleon, blended harmoniously in society as a Joseph Newton Chandler, electing to quietly hide away in Eastlake, Ohio.
Ohio!
From the outside, Chandler seemed to live a quiet life from his one-bedroom apartment. Inside were homemade gadgets he built, get-rich-quick books, and a calendar where it was found that he had crossed out the days until he passed away. He worked as an engineer at Lubrizol, where coworkers stated that Chandler's behavior could be at times interesting. He occasionally told a few coworkers that he was worried about some people that were after him, stating that someone was, quote, getting close, but he never cared to elaborate further. According to his medical report in 1989, Chandler had gone to the hospital with a life-threatening injury, and he had claimed that he had gotten injured from being a bit too intimate with his vacuum cleaner. And it had apparently resulted in severe lacerations. Another coworker recalls that he once drove all the way to an LL Bean store 700 miles away, only to return home after there were, quote, no parking spots.
What?
He would apparently listen to TV static for hours on end. He apparently went to an office Halloween party dressed as Al Capone, and then sat in the corner and spoke to no one the entire night.
That's weird.
On the surface, outside of this strange behavior, Nichols' life was as boring as you could expect it to be. But as these other details come to life, you have to ask, why would he change his identity? He clearly had something to hide. Was he a fugitive? Was he just paranoid? Or was he running away from illegal trouble or unpayable debts? There must have been some reason he never contacted his family again. One can only speculate. It's also worth considering the fact that there is a massive gap between the time that he goes missing and the time that he assumes his identity. Given the fact that he did nothing for 17 years, you have to assume he would have left some paper trail somehow, meaning it may have been possible that he not only switched his name once, but possibly twice or even 3 times. Given this ability to elude a big brother, we only know where he started and ended. And just like in the case of Kimberly
I'm pretty
McLean,
sure he actually
we
did
still
kill himself.
don't fully understand why.
I think someone else did. Too much shit seems really weird. Yep. Another chapter, the paper trip. Chapter 3.
Now, if there's something I should clarify, it's that while Kimberly and Robert's cases are particularly mysterious, they are far from unique. A similar situation took place with a man by the name of Dylan Riebling in 2002, when a friend of his had passed away as the result of a heart attack.
Be right back, chat.
The man had stolen the identity of a child who died in 1973, once again a very similar situation. In this particular case, the guy had lived out the rest of his life just a couple of hours away from his family. In February of 2013, a revelation came forth when it was reported that Britain's police force had stolen the identities of some 80 deceased children and issued fake passports in their name for undercover operations. Another man by the name of John Vincent had escaped a halfway house in Texas in 1986. Then he had been caught impersonating a dead child's identity for over 20 years. He had raised 2 kids under that name, got married twice, and proceeded to live his life as normal until he got caught. Now, whenever there's a discussion on this type of case, what often gets overlooked is the method in which these 2 people had used in order to live under a new name. And while I'm sure many of you are more familiar with traditional identity theft, such as stealing a credit card for fraudulent purchases, in these 2 particular cases, it's a type of identity theft called ghosting. This is what you would call literal identity theft, where the goal is to steal an identity long term, where you're actually trying to live under that stolen identity. And to put it frankly, I want to say that this video is obviously for educational purposes only. I in no way condone you breaking the law. Moreover, I should say that this method used by Lori and Chandler in the modern day is completely outdated. And for those people that have managed to fly under the radar in the past couple decades, it largely stems from them stealing identities decades ago.
Yeah.
On top of that, as governments have gotten better at record keeping, moving over from paper to digital, this isn't something that will likely ever be the same again.
No.
But to continue on into the specifics behind this particular method as it used to be, it largely originates from one particular source, a source that has a lot of untold history. Now, the book that I'm speaking of came from a company by the name of Eden Press, a controversial publication that essentially taught people guides on various skeevy subjects. So you had things like classic mail frauds, how to beat the bill collector, and the most popular title is what this video is really all about. Published in 1970, The Paper Trip was an obscure and short book sold in local counterculture newspapers and eventually other newspapers. It outlined one very particular instance in which someone could quite literally trip up Big Brother and steal a full identity with ease. It involved people acquiring a real birth certificate in a dead child's name and using it as the breeder document, which then could obtain a social security card, a driver's license, credit cards, and create
this type
a new
is
identity.
gone, though. Ghosting
And for
is
something
not
we've
really
seen
a
from
thing
the cases
anymore
like Lori
because
Ruff and
paper
Mr.
and
Chandler,
else, and paper's no longer
it's that they ended up doing just that. If you recall, they could not
I'm sure
get
there are
any
still
usable
people out
prints
there who are
off
under
of
false
Chandler.
names, but
Now, normally you might
not
not
the same
think much
way.
of this, but if
You
you've
shouldn't do
read
it,
The
it's all
Paper
fucking
Trip
illegal.
and you know what he's referring to, there's a specific section on avoiding getting fingerprinted. And in particular, it talks about getting your fingers grafted in a medical procedure.
Oof.
Or alternatively, burning your fingers with acid.
Yeah.
And in regards to Lori, aside from the ID, if you recall, she faked those letters of recommendation, which is also recommended in some of those books. And if you recall the fact that Chandler had a packed bag, that is also another bit of advice that comes from The Paper Trip, as they discuss moving on to the next identity at any given moment. And it's safe to say that if they were practicing all of these things on a regular basis for their
that's
primary
on you,
identity,
Porky.
they were probably
You're not
doing a
human
whole list
anyways.
of other things for their other identities. And it was reported in 1983 that some 75,000 individuals had avoided arrest using these particular guidebooks. And if you really stop to think about this for a moment, this one book influenced a lot of people's ways of living. While it was initially released as a way of dodging the draft, it's safe to say that many people may still be living under an identity that they forged from one of these methods. With that being said, it really makes you wonder if everyone you meet is really who they say they are. But that being said, I'm barely sociable, and have a good night.
Alright, there we go. Great production quality, by the way. But that kind of ties into fisting 411 missing people. But these are people that basically did, identity theft of it. Okay. I'm pretty sure that song's copyrighted, so we're going to move on. Pretty sure next up we have another Mr. Ballin video. Yes, we do.
reality of being human and living on planet Earth that sometimes people go missing without any clue as to what happened to them. One day they're here, the next day they're gone. There's no clear indication of what happened. And despite everybody else's best efforts, nothing is ever learned about what happened to them. And so their families and their friends, they're left with this void in their lives that I can only imagine how terrible that is. There's no closure. There's like that perpetual sense that if you could just find
Call me Porky the Pollock.
Find out what happened to your loved one, to your friend, to your colleague. But many times, people never get that. These people just go missing, and that's it. But in some cases, where people suddenly go missing, they'll turn up again.
Yes, they will.
Sometimes days, weeks, months, years later, in totally different locations from where they went missing. But sometimes, in very rare circumstances, these people that go missing will reemerge days, weeks, months, years later, not having any idea how they got there or what happened to them. And so today I'm going to share 3 of these reappearance stories. The first 2 are the most well-known. They're very famous. And the third one is not as well-known, but equally as intriguing. But before we get into today's 3 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that is
Mr. Ballin with Wendigoon is one of probably the better sources of this kind of stuff.
So if that's
by the way,
you'd be
Chad.
interested in,
So if you're interested in something with him, I definitely would say do that. Me and Genova really dig his content a lot.
All notifications, so you don't miss any of my 3 to 4 weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into the stories.
Mr. Ballin. Stephen Kubacki?
In 1978, a 23-year-old named Stephen Kubacki was attending a college called Hope University in Michigan. It was a small Christian
You need hope in Michigan,
all
right.
He was studying German and history. Stephen
German
was
and history.
a little more free-spirited than the typical student enrolled at Hope University, which was very conservative. He was a big-time outdoor enthusiast, and he loved to go skiing. In February of 1978,
Stephen
which was just months
Bukake.
before Stephen was set to graduate, he decided he wanted to go on a solo ski trip around the Lake Michigan area. And so this
that's a
area
mistake.
was known as the Lake Michigan Triangle. It's also known as just the Michigan Triangle, and it's an awful lot like the Bermuda Triangle, which is in that northern section of the Atlantic Ocean where planes and boats have gone missing over the years kind of inexplicably. Well, the Michigan Triangle is like that. And starting in the late 1800s, there were all these disappearances that started occurring in the Michigan Triangle area. And so Stephen was going to be skiing around the Lake Michigan area, and so he would be in the Michigan Triangle. Now, he had told his friends and his family that he was just going out for a day trip, and Stephen was a very accomplished outdoorsman, excellent cross-country skier, so really no one bats an eye when he decides to go out and, go skiing. No one even thought twice about it. They're like, all right, cool, we'll see you tomorrow. A day
we'll see you later.
Stephen had left for this ski trip, some snowmobilers were out in the
I would
Michigan
definitely
Triangle
recommend
area,
for
and they
most people to
spotted
not
a
do shit
trail
like this
of,
alone. Be with
ski
a group.
tracks that
It's not
led up
smart
the
to
edge
go
of
out on
the
your own
lake,
places.
Where at the edge of the lake were a set of skis and 2 ski poles. Just
Well,
stopped
you can go
abruptly,
missing
and
in
they
even
see that
normal
this
places,
looks
so,
like someone might have fallen into the lake. Now, there weren't any clear breaks in the
Just
lake
happens.
itself, but they figured it was worth telling police and to at least let them know in case they're looking for someone who might have gone missing in the area. And so it was around this
Well,
time
there's been
that
some of
Stephen
us who have been
Kubacki's
chatters
friends
that
and
they're
family
gone now. I
started to
imagine it's
recognize
nothing
that
like
he wasn't
innocuous,
back
but it's
yet, and
just,
he should have been.
shit
And
like
so
that
they
happens to
end
people,
up
and I have no
calling
idea what
in an
happens to
official
them.
missing persons report
They just
because
drop
he
off
should
the
have been
face of the
back.
fucking earth, man.
And so the 2 things happened in tandem. You have the snowmobilers that have found the ski poles and the skis, and you have the missing persons report that's come out for Stephen Kubacki, and immediately they're connected, and this massive search effort is launched with a focus on where those skis and the poles were found. Now, they looked everywhere, but it was like his tracks went right up to the edge of the lake and then just stopped. There weren't any more tracks
I guess
on
this
the
is
lake.
not for me.
There were no breaks in the lake. There was nothing there. It was like he just suddenly either went into the ground or just vanished somehow. And so as hundreds of people have
When
descended
you see a
on this
notification
area
on something, then
looking for
realize,
Steve
oh,
Kubacki,
it's
his
for that's an
backpack
everyone
shows
notification.
up right next to his skis and ski poles. That was the first place that everybody went, and his backpack wasn't there. And they didn't really even know how to investigate it. It was just this weird phenomenon where all these people are like, I guess it just must have been there the whole time. They just didn't have a good answer for it. And so after a long and very elaborate search, ultimately they had to call it off. And so they told the family and friends that what must have happened is he got out of his skis and put everything down, went onto the lake, and it cracked and he fell in. And so that's what everybody believed. I mean, why wouldn't they? 15 months go by, and Stephen's father hears a knocking on the door.
Is it Stephen?
Who's at the door? Stephen Kubacki.
The
and when he
fuck?
sees his son, he can't believe it because he believed his son was dead. But Kubacki has no idea. Steve has no idea how much time has passed. He saw a newspaper. Stephen saw a newspaper in his father's house, and it showed that it had been 15 months since he disappeared.
Holy
He
fuck.
asked his father, like, how can this be? And he told Stephen, you were near Lake Michigan. That's 700 miles away. How did you get here? And Stephen's like, I woke up in a field about 40 miles from here, and I went to, my aunt's house, your sister's house, and she brought me here. And no one had any idea how he got there or why he was in the field in Pittsfield to begin with. In addition, Stephen had on clothes that he didn't recognize. He had a new backpack that had maps and all sorts of kind of like
That's
trinkets
weird.
from different parts of the country. He had been to apparently San Francisco, Sacramento, all over California,
fuck?
Chicago, to Utah. He's been all over the country, according to the things that are in his backpack. He had $40 in cash. He had new sneakers, new glasses, and he had a t-shirt on from a Wisconsin marathon. It says he was a participant in. And one of the only things that Stephen would say to the media, because he basically swore off the media and he didn't want to give his story to
No,
anybody,
don't give them
he
anything.
just said to one of the news outlets that he felt like he had been doing a lot of running. But other than that, we don't know what he was doing for 15 months.
Even he doesn't
Apparently
fucking
he
know.
doesn't either.
That's creepy.
In early 2018, Danny Philippidis was...
I mean, he's alive, but just
49-year-old
imagine
firefighter
like
living in
15
Canada.
fucking months of your life
He had
just
a wife, he had
gone.
kids,
You have no idea why the
happy,
fuck.
healthy, successful. And every year, he and his colleagues at the firehouse would go on a ski trip to New York, where they would go skiing at a mountain called Whiteface. And so on February 7th, 2018, Danny and his 7 colleagues are at Whiteface. They're enjoying themselves. Danny was an avid skier. Like, this is something he really looked forward to, was this annual retreat to Whiteface Mountain. And it was getting to be lunchtime, and his 7 colleagues said, hey, let's go down to the lodge and get a bite to eat. Danny was just having a great time on the mountain, and he was like, I'm going to just do a couple more runs. I'll meet you guys in about 30 minutes or so. I'm going to do a couple more runs before lunch. So they go down to the lodge, and Danny continues to do a couple more runs. And so after an hour or so, and Danny still hasn't shown up at the lodge, his 7 colleagues have finished eating, and they're like, you know what? I bet Danny just decided he wanted to skip lunch, and he's probably just fine. And so they end up just going out and skiing the rest of the day. But by the end of the night, when the mountain is starting to shut down, they're all checking their phones for messages from Danny. They haven't gotten anything from him. They haven't seen him. They decide, let's go check out, his room back at the hotel and make sure that he's there. Maybe he got sick and he left, something like that.
That's terrifying as a thought, Wyatt, to be buried in an avalanche.
Right over to his room.
I would never
He didn't
imagine
answer,
what you'd
but then they
fucking
went
do.
out back and they found his car.
Because the biggest thing
and
they
his
always
car
tell
was
you
still
when an
there.
avalanche
They
happens
went
is
to
try
the front
to,
desk,
like
they
it's
explained the
water, like you're
situation. They
swimming.
ended up going
So you
in the
don't
room
get
and
under.
checking
But
to see if
imagine
he was
like
in
multiple
there.
avalanches
He
have,
wasn't,
fuck,
but
you're
all
just,
of his
I don't know if
personal
anyone's ever
belongings
going to
were
save
still
you.
inside of the room. So
Starvation to
Danny,
death and
who
freezing to
has
death are
shown
not
up
fun things to
after
think
going
about.
skiing for this additional run, clearly hasn't left the mountain because his car's still here, his cash, his passport.
We're fucking
everything is in
suffocating.
his
Oh
room,
god.
But no one knows where Danny is. And so they
Just,
launched this
that's
massive
a miserable
search
fucking
for
way to
Danny.
die.
And I mean, this
Several
day was
miserable
so
ways you could die
crowded
from
at
an
Whiteface.
avalanche.
There's so many people there, and also it had snowed a ton before they even started skiing that day. So it would have been very difficult to move very far off the mountain, let's say, if someone wanted to. I mean, just there was too much snow on the ground. So he couldn't have gotten very far. And there were lots of people there that they could interview to say, have you seen this man? They had a picture of him, and no one had seen him. And there was no sign of him. Despite this massive search effort, no one has any idea what happened to him. The authorities call off the search, and they tell his loved ones and his friends that Danny must have succumbed to the elements. That's the only explanation we can give. We can't find him now because the snow's pretty deep. But hopefully when the weather warms up, we'll be able to launch another search and we can recover his body. And so that's the news that's passed to his wife, to his kids, to his friends, and it's just devastating.
But Danny comes
and a
back.
couple days later, Danny's wife is home, trying to adjust to this awful new normal, and she gets a phone call from a number she doesn't recognize.
It's Danny.
And she picks it up, and it's a little bit hard to hear, but she immediately recognizes her husband's voice. And she can tell right away that there's something wrong. Like, he's not making sense. She's like, Danny, is that you? Is that you? And Danny's like, I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. Where are you? What am I doing? And so she immediately tells him, you have to call the police. You have to call the police. They have to come get you. And finally he agrees and he hangs up. The police receive a phone call from Danny, and he doesn't know where he is. He's saying that, my wife told me to call you. I'm very confused. I don't know what's going on. And they ask him to describe where he is. And he starts describing what's around him. And police are able to, eventually pinpoint where he is. And it turns out he was near Sacramento, California, 2,900 miles away from
What the fuck?
Whiteface Mountain. Even more strangely, when the police go to collect Danny, he's still wearing his ski gear. Winter jacket, winter pants.
Holy
ski
fuck,
boots
that's
on.
so
He even
weird.
still had his goggles on his head. And he has a haircut. He has a fresh haircut. And he has a brand new phone, a brand new iPhone. But he had no money. He had no wallet. He had nothing. He had left all of his belongings in his room. So looking at him like, how did you get a new phone? How did you get a haircut? Why did you get a new haircut?
Why is he all the way
And when you got
2,800
your
miles
haircut, why
away
did the
from where he
person
was?
cutting your hair let someone know that a man who's visibly confused wearing ski gear is getting a haircut in here? And so it's just a totally strange mystery that Danny, to this day, and anybody that knows Danny and his friends, the investigators, everybody, no one knows how he got there. How does a
That's
guy
so fucking
without a car,
strange.
without any money, wearing ski gear, go from New York to Sacramento, California, somehow get a haircut and buy a new phone, and then just suddenly come to and be like, oh, that's right, I'm Danny, and I'm going to call my wife and let her know where I am now. Like,
That sounds like MK Ultra shit. Young boy.
So this last story was documented in the official American Ethnology Report from 1897, 1898. Although
Wow.
the story is, well documented in this report, the location is unclear. People have speculated that it's either Ireland, Scotland, or Wales. So just take this with a grain of salt that the location is not known. It's an older story, but it was officially documented in an official report. In 1898, a 12-year-old boy was playing at this river that ran near his house. He was out in the forest, he was playing to this river, and he had a bow and arrow, and he was practicing shooting his bow and arrow. And after a little while, he got bored of his bow and arrow, and he went to the stream itself, and he started to build a little dam in the river to try to catch some fish. And as he's building this thing up, he's down on his knees building up this little dam in the river, he notices someone is walking down the river towards him. And he looks up, and he would describe this person as looking normal, a normal-looking stranger. It's a gentleman who shows up. He's wearing a nice suit. He walks over to Wofford, and he apparently just came out of the woods. And he says, hey, what are you doing? And the boy, he's like, oh, I'm making this fish trap. And he's like, man, that looks like a lot of work. Like, you should take a break. And the boy's like, yeah, I guess I could take a break. And the gentleman just says, well, if you want, while you're taking this break, you can come to my house. It's just up past the bend here. My family's there. You can have a meal with us, and then you can come back and you can finish your fish trap.
Oh,
and
that
so,
sounds
this is a
weird.
different time. This is the late 1800s, and I'm not suggesting that at the time it was totally cool to go with strangers into weird houses in the forest, but the boy felt compelled to say yes. He didn't want to be rude, and maybe his fear of strangers is less extreme than it is, for us today in 2020. And so he agrees to go with the man. They make their way up past the river into the forest a little bit, and they come up to this cabin. Now, the
not
boy
spooky at all.
played in the woods here, and he had never seen this house before. But he's not too concerned, because as soon as he gets to the house, this cabin in the woods, he sees that the lights are on, and he hears kids playing inside. And a close family friend of his family's is sitting on the porch talking to one of the other apparently family members of the stranger. And so the boys put at ease. And he says hi to the family friend, and the family friend, waves back. The boy goes inside, and he sees that this family has a couple of kids, roughly his age. They're playing, goofing around. They have dinner, this wonderful meal. And the boy, Wofford, is like, man, this is so great. And after the meal, he lays down and falls asleep. He kind of loses track of time. The boy falls asleep at this cabin. And so he wakes up early the next morning, and he feels horrible because he didn't mean to fall asleep, and he didn't tell anyone from his family where he was going. And he's thinking, man, they're going to be so worried about me. And so as he's getting up to leave, the stranger is already awake, the one that had met him down by the river and called him up to the house. And the boy says, hey, can you walk me down back to the river? And the stranger's like, I can take you part of the way down, sure. So the two of them, they're having small talk, and the boy's thanking the man for his generosity. And so as they're walking, they're passing by an orchard on one side and a cornfield on the other. And it's this beautiful morning, the sun's just coming up, and the boy remembers thinking how beautiful the setting was. But he also was thinking, like, I don't
remember
even know
saying
where I
that.
am right now. And I'm assuming he's walking me back to where I live, but this doesn't look familiar at all. And the stranger stops. They get to almost a junction right at the end of the orchard and of the cornfield. And the stranger tells the boy, Wofford, he says, hey, just go straight. You're going to turn down this way, turn back, and you'll be at the river again where we met. And the boy thanks the stranger, and the stranger turns and starts walking back.
Someone tells me a lot of
cabin
years
and
have
says, hey,
passed.
good luck, see ya. And the boy starts following the man's directions. And Wofford, as he's walking, following the stranger's directions, he's suddenly curious and turns around to look back at this strange person who had brought him up to the house and then now brought him back. And he's stunned because suddenly the orchard and the cornfield are not there. There is no orchard or cornfield. It's just deep, dark forest. And he's like, what's going on? He turns back, and there's a search party, or it looks like a search party, running up to him. Part of the search party is the family friend that he had seen at the house. And the boy's like looking at these people running towards him, like they're running to him. And he recognizes the family friend, and he can tell they're like urgently looking for him. And he felt bad because he knows he slept over through the night. So he's like, hey, I'm here. And they're like, where have you been? And the boy turns to the family friend, and he's like, didn't you tell them I was with you? And the family friend is like, what are you talking about?
Yep, he doesn't know.
Yeah, the house with the family. We ate dinner together last night. And the guy, the family friend, is like, I've been looking for you for the past several days.
Days.
I've been with your family looking for you. You've been gone for 3 days. And the boy is like, what? And as he's describing the kind of general vicinity of where this cabin was, he's kind of pointing back up towards where it was and describing it from where the river was. The family says to him that since you've been missing, we've heard rhythmic drumming non-stop coming from the section of the forest that you just described. We could never pinpoint where it was coming from. And now that you just showed up, the drumming has stopped. And so the kid's terrified, but there's no answers. Pretty creepy. So 3 very strange stories that luckily all of them ended with the person being found again.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that
It's
the
weird.
mystery remains. Where did they go? It's like they left the earth for a couple of days, or in Stephen Kubaki's case, for over a year, and then came back. It was like a glitch in the matrix or something. And so I would love to hear in the comments what you think can possibly explain how these people are disappearing without a trace and then reappearing days, weeks, months, years later, not having any idea how they got there or what had happened to them. How can we possibly reconcile that? And if you like this video and you want to see more videos like this, I would ask you to
definitely recommend Mr. Ballen's channel.
Lobotomy on the like button, and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my other 3 to 4 weekly uploads that I do every week that sound an awful lot like the story you just heard. If you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballen, so you can follow me over there. I also go live on TikTok Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern, so you can check me out over there or on Instagram or here on YouTube or any of these places. But wherever you're finding me,
let's
I
move on.
really
Next.
appreciate
We have the Lower Lodge. I'm going to move this back. We have Was He Dragged to Hell? Missing 411. This is about 13 minutes long. Let's watch.
Welcome back to the Lower Lodge.
Welcome back to the Lower Lodge. Alfred Bellhartz?
On July 4th, 1938, the Beilhartz family was on vacation in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. They were spending this time hiking, fishing, camping, just overall having a good time, because the Beilhartz family had 10 children. So the total of 12 family members meant that basically any excursion was going to be a larger affair and event. The family had chosen to set up their campsite near Roaring River in a fairly isolated area of the national park. Now, no weather data for this year actually exists as far as I can tell, so I had to figure out how this situation would have looked for them in 1938 using today's numbers. Now, the Estes Park area of Rocky Mountain National Park gets up to a maximum of 101 degrees in July and a minimum of 53 degrees in July. Taking into account the fact that the Earth has gotten slightly warmer since 1938, we can probably say with confidence that we were looking at least 90 degrees at the peak heat of the day. This area of the park, being in the Rockies, does have a number of peaks, cliff faces, steeper mountains, so it's a pretty treacherous area, but if you're hiking with a large group, with family, and everybody's paying attention, there's no real reason that somebody should find themselves unable to get down or even find their way up most of these peaks, especially not 4-year-old Alfred Beilhartz. Considering the temperatures, Alfred probably would have been wearing lighter clothes, and it's said that he was wearing a bandage, though I couldn't actually figure out where the bandage was on his body. Probably, I would guess, his arm or his leg. Getting up from their specific campsite and going on a quick hike over to Estes Park, the family lined up, quite literally, so that the adults were in the front and then the children were working their way back. Now, based on what happened, it seems like maybe the adults should have been on both sides of the line, as they have been in every instance in my life where anything like this has happened. But for whatever reason, the Beilhartz parents decided that they were both going to walk at the front of the line and trust their kids to look after one another. So, they set off, and somewhere during the journey from their campsite to Estes Park, Alfred vanished. The family quickly launched a preliminary search, assuming that he had just wandered off, but the remaining 11 members of the family could not find him. So, they went and spoke to forest rangers, who immediately launched a search for Alfred. The assumption that the investigators took was that Alfred had managed to find his way down into a nearby creek and drowned. Why they immediately went to Alfred being dead at the bottom of a creek is something I will never understand, but national park's gonna national park. After a few days, bloodhounds were brought in because nobody could find Alfred, and there was no sign of his body. They had dammed the creek, they had drudged the creek, they figured he was there, but they couldn't find any sign of him, none of his belongings, nor none of his remains. So, they decided instead they were going to widen the search. The first set of bloodhounds found his scent and immediately bolted up rather than down. Now, the place that they went was a very, very steep hill as part of one of these mountains, that they went about 500 feet up in a way that there's absolutely no way that a 4-year-old could have made this climb. Not only because it was very steep and rocky, but also because it simply would not have been possible for a 4-year-old to have the upper body strength to climb 500 feet up a cliff face. But the dogs did lead investigators up that 500-foot hike, and then, upon reaching this plateau, simply laid down as if Alfred was right there, as if they had completed their job. There was no trail, Alfred didn't seem to have moved, and they didn't sniff further up the mountain. So, whatever happened with Alfred after he reached that spot, if he did, the dogs didn't seem to have any idea what it would be. So, realizing that this was completely ridiculous, there's no way Alfred ever was there, they figured, you know what, the dogs screwed up, we're going to bring in a second team of dogs, and they're going to search. But that second dog team went to the exact same place. So, baffled by this, investigators really had nothing else to go off of and asked people to simply keep a lookout. Now, they had ignored one possible sighting of Alfred, because only 24 hours into the search and 6 miles away from where the dogs eventually led the investigators, another man had claimed to have seen something. This man, whose identity has never actually been verified, was hiking on a trail near Mount Chapin. He recalled that he had heard some rustling, looked up, and about 500 feet up, in an elevation called the Devil's Nest, he had seen a child peering down at him. And then, suddenly, the child screamed and was pulled backwards. And that was the last he saw. He reported it, and because it was so far away, and only 24 hours into the search, nobody really believed that it was possible Alfred even got over there. On top of that, he was 500 feet in the air. So, how could that possibly happen? They just figured, no, it's not possible, there's no way. So the only thing that was said was, we'll keep a lookout and we'll try and see. We'll keep the case open. They didn't assume he was dead, and Alfred's parents fully believed that Alfred was still alive and had been kidnapped. About a year later, somebody cited Alfred in Nebraska walking with a man, but it couldn't be confirmed, and there was not enough detail to actually determine who the man he would have been with was, so that lead went cold. As well, there was a... wait, no, that wasn't a year after. Sometime after Alfred's disappearance, a man in Nebraska... Alfred's disappearance, a child who matched his description was seen walking with a man in Nebraska, but nobody could identify who the man was, and so that lead ran cold. The only other lead that came after Alfred's disappearance was when a ransom note was delivered to the house, which demanded $500 for the safe return of Alfred, saying that the child would not take to them, and if the money was given to them, they would deliver him within 24 hours. The letter said that they had gone out west. Now, keep in mind, the family was from Denver, so that means basically that they were in California. The federal government did investigate, but they just determined that it was a cruel hoax in their opinion and did not follow it any further. Now, it would have been very easy for them to leave the $500 in a can as requested and simply stake it out and see what happened. Whether or not these people actually did have Alfred, if they were to do that, and all they had to do was leave a can with $500 in it, which at today's time would be about $10,000, all they had to do was leave that can there and watch it to see if anything came of it. If there were kidnappers, they could probably have found Alfred. If there weren't kidnappers, they at least could have caught the people who were trying to profit off of this family's trauma. So the fact that the feds didn't investigate at all, or even the local police didn't go through with this, because let's be realistic, I'm pretty sure their community could have pulled together $500 to get this child back, regardless of whether it was going to lead to the child returning, or to it being discovered that someone was just playing a cruel prank. In either case, that's better than what they did, which was nothing at all.
Yeah.
And finally, it didn't involve a sighting or a promise of delivery, but in an abandoned cabin in Rocky Mountain National Park, they did find a bandage, and the bandage was tested. At the time, since we don't have DNA testing yet, I'm assuming that the test was that they let bloodhounds sniff it or tried to link it to Alfred in some way, but it couldn't be confirmed that it was his, and even so, there was no lead regarding the abandoned cabin other than that there was a bandage there. So, once again, the case went cold. Fast forward to 2022, 84 years later, and Alfred is still missing, and almost certainly, simply due to the time period,
dead.
Even if he was alive, it's very unlikely that he would have reached 88 years old living out in the wilderness. So, Alfred is likely dead today, and was never found. The case will never be solved. This does fit with a number of the missing 411 cases that we've picked out as having a higher likelihood of supernatural involvement. Now, this is for a few reasons. A, it fits almost every single profile point of this, what we've kind of dubbed the flesh pedestrian, whatever this creature
pedestrian.
It is theorized inhabits the North American continent and is responsible for some of these missing 411 cases.
Flesh pedestrian,
because we're talking
that's a term.
Cave systems, mountains, national park, sketchy vibes from the feds, and a few other things like the river and the fact that he disappeared ostensibly from what would have been a line where he could have been seen. I mean, we're assuming that nobody put a 4-year-old alone at the back of the line. So how is it that Alfred disappeared and nobody saw it, and the feds put so little effort into looking for him? The search effort, while involving 150 people and dogs and all of that, only lasted 10 days and didn't follow up on what may have been the only concrete lead just a day into the search. It almost seems like they weren't really looking for him, or like they didn't want to find him, because it might uncover something strange. On top of that, like I said, there's the fact that the other lead for where he might have been was 500 feet up a hill, a mountain really, in a little enclave on a little plateau, and the last sighting of him was him being dragged away from the cliff while screaming. So, clearly, in order for him to have even gotten up there, and remember, the bloodhounds twice did lead investigators 500 feet up a mountain to a spot that he could not have gotten to on his own. That means that he must have been carried up there, either by a kidnapper, a person, or by something else. Now, had he been carried up that way by a mountain lion or some other predator, there likely would have been blood spots, signs of a struggle, but there wasn't anything. So that kind of rules out natural predation, which means that either somebody carried him up and captured him, like either waited for him to wander off, which means that somebody was stalking this family, or managed to sneak up on him, grab him, and get him 500 feet up a mountain without him screaming. So really, no matter what the case here, the only feasible natural explanation is that a human being convinced him to wander off the trail without his family noticing, and then once he got behind a tree or something, grabbed him, put a hand over his mouth, and then maybe knocked him out and carried him up. That's the only thing I can really think of here. And it's even then, it's still flimsy. But like I always say, we try and look for a rational explanation before we immediately say something is supernatural. So, what's the possibility here? He was kidnapped by the most adept kidnapper to ever exist and never seen again. Or something that the government does not want us to know about took him.
Very possible.
But, you know, we can always trust the government, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
Wink.
let us know your thoughts. We're very curious about what other people think of this case, considering how strange it is. We do try and lay out all of the available facts before we jump to any conclusion, and the reason that we put our conclusions about what may have happened at the end of the video, rather than at the beginning of the video and trying to persuade you, is so that you can come to your own conclusions and then see if you agree with us. So let us know what your thoughts were in the comments. If you liked this video, even if you didn't like this video, smash the like button. Hit the subscribe button. That way you can hate on us.
Don't worry, I shared it with people.
And
don't worry about that.
Of course, the notification bell will let you know every time we post. But we post every
that's
Friday.
The Lore Lodge.
Now at about.
Let's move on to Mr. Balling. And 2 more videos from him, and then one more video after this one, then we're done. So let's watch this. 3 kids found in impossible places. This is part 4.
People go missing inside of national parks and forests.
I will be right back
all
again.
over North America. Of those hundreds, every year there's always a few that go missing under very strange circumstances. And one man, whose name is David Paulides, who's a former police detective, has made it his mission to investigate these strange disappearances. We're talking about people that are in plain sight of other people, that suddenly, in an instant, go missing, and there's absolutely no trace of them. It's like they've just vanished off the earth. In other cases, it's people that have gone missing and then are found in locations that are seemingly impossible to get to. And so these cases are explored under David Paulides' Missing 411. He's written numerous books, created documentaries around it. And so today I'm going to focus on 3 of these Missing 411 cases that, in my opinion, are especially bizarre and worth a closer examination. If the Missing 411 phenomenon is something you want to look into more closely, I would obviously tell you to go check out David Paulides and his team. I have all their links in the description. But you can also just go to one of my playlists. It's just called Missing 411, and I put any episode that I do about Missing 411 in that playlist. And so far, this is the 4th. And if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do on this channel. And I upload 3 to 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to gently mule kick the like button, and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications. So you
How
don't
does one
miss any of
gently
those
mule
awesome
kick?
weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Cobes is live and looking drunk. Well, he will be a missing Boglum 411.
In 1999, Alan Atadero was staying in the Comanche wilderness in northern Colorado with his 2 kids. He had his daughter, who was 6 years old, her name was Jocelyn, and his son, Jared, who was 3 at the time. They were staying at the Poudre River Resort, which Alan actually owned. He co-owned it with his identical twin brother, and Alan was up there to prepare the resort for winter. Alan had recently divorced from his wife and joined a Christian singles group, and somehow it came up that some people in the singles group asked if they could stay at the Poudre River Resort with Alan and help him prepare the resort for winter in exchange for free lodging so they could have a little vacation. Alan said that was great because he really needed the help. As soon as they got up there, 11 of the Christian singles members were talking about going to the nearby state fish hatchery. Jared and Jocelyn had heard about this and were really eager to go with them, and they asked their father, Alan, if that would be okay. Alan felt comfortable with Jocelyn, his 6-year-old, going, but was reluctant to send Jared because he was 3, was worried that, you know, he would lag behind and was just generally reluctant to send his youngest. But Jared really wanted to go, and Jared was saying, well, you let Jocelyn go, I want to go. Alan, maybe against his better judgment, said, yep, you can take Jared. Jared hated wearing shoes. Jared said, can I leave my shoes?
Also, for anyone
said,
interested,
no,
I will post this in the Discord
and
spooky
Jared really put up a fight. He didn't want to wear his
section.
Shoes.
It is
Alan said, okay,
the Spook
put on your
House
shoes, we
is
just won't
the
tie them.
name of that spooky
That's the
section. It is the
compromise
Missing
they made. Put on
411
his shoes,
channel.
Didn't tie them, and he was off.
There you
so
go.
the Christian singles group of 11 plus Jocelyn
They are
and
all
Jared
retired
take
police
off towards the
officers
state fish hatchery.
telling stories
But
of
without
missing
asking
411
for Alan's
cases.
consent, instead of going to the state fish
Since we haven't watched
hatchery,
anything from
they
that, but that's
decided
where a
to
lot of
head
these
over
guys
to
are
the
getting
Big
information
South
that
Trail,
we've been
which is
watching
about
tonight.
15 miles west of the
Both in the
resort
United
where
States
Alan
and
was.
Canada.
They get to the beginning of this trail, which is an 11-mile, very rugged trail. Narrow path. It's fairly steep. You're going up almost 10,000 feet of elevation.
David
This is
Pauli's.
a rugged hike. This was not a beginner's hike. Now, we don't know exactly what the timeline is here, but we know that Jared and Jocelyn were definitely with the Christian singles group when they began this hike. Because at some point, the Christian singles broke into like a fast group and a slow group. And during that time, when they kind of separated into two groups,
I'm sure
Jared
David does a
had
great
somehow
job of
run ahead of one of the
doing
groups.
that, by
And
the way.
had come in contact with these two fishermen that were on the Big South Trail. The Big South Trail was located near a world-class fly fishing area, and these two men were fly fishing. And they saw Jared, and they also saw these two groups of people making this climb on this trail, and they, the fishermen, assumed that he had to be with them. Jared walked up to them and said, hey, have you seen any bears in the area? And they said, no. And Jared just skipped away. It's believed that the two fishermen that saw Jared on the trail were the last two people to see Jared alive.
Also,
At
if you
some
do
point
search in
shortly
like
after
just
Jared
Missing
has
411
made
channel, a lot of
contact
stuff will
with these
come up.
fishermen, the
regardless.
singles group realizes they've
One of the
lost
things I see
track
is from
of
another good
Jared.
channel I
They
know
have
called What
Jocelyn,
Lurks
they've
Beneath,
lost
which
sight
is a
of
park
Jared.
ranger reveals
And so
terrifying
there's an
secret within
immediate search
Yosemite
of the
National
area. They're
Park.
yelling
I will
out
post
to
that as
Jared,
well.
And after about an hour, they
in
haven't
the
found
Spook
him.
House.
However,
Again, this
one
is a very
of the
deep
Christian
subject, and
singles
there's plenty of
members
videos
hears
on
a
it.
scream.
It's
It was not
honestly
a
kind of
scream
terrifying.
of someone getting attacked, but rather it was way off, off the trail. It sounded like a child.
And there's plenty more we
who
could
they
cover
would
at some
describe
point
the
too, which I
scream
may
as
go back
sounding
to.
gleeful,
This
like
may
they
be
were
a subject
playing
we
with someone,
revisit.
like they were playing tag or hide and seek with someone. They tried to make it over to that
Yeah,
area,
Vision
but they
Darkness
couldn't locate where the
Prevails.
sound was
Well,
coming
he's
from.
a
And despite
narrating
yelling
channel.
out for Jared constantly,
Just posting all
they
this stuff
could
for
never
other
locate him.
content you guys
While
might
the
wanna
search
watch.
is going on, one of the
know,
members
Let's Read has
leaves
one, too, about
and
Washington
goes back
State.
to the resort to break the news to Alan, Jared's father. Alan immediately gets in his car. He's yelling, "You lost my baby!" And he drives over to the Big South Trail. Now, Alan just
So let me
assumed
get
he'd be
that
able to
last
get out
one of-
and just charge around like a
gonna
maniac,
look it up.
yelling for his son, and he would find
Let's Read
him.
411.
But he quickly realizes that this is a
Because Let's Read's a good
really
channel too. I
rugged
just don't want to play
and
their stuff
very dense
mostly
area.
because
it's, gonna be almost impossible
it's
for
kind of
he
not as
alone to
visual.
search and
I
find
mean, it
his
can be
son.
kind of
He
relaxing
calls
visual-wise,
authorities,
but
and authorities show
they're
up,
also
and they
very big
launch this
channels.
massive
And I
search.
have played
Now,
some
the
of
search
them
and rescue
before,
crew,
but
when they
not all of
showed
them.
up, they were very confident that they were going to find Jared. They felt like they had a really good sense of where he was, that it would have been very difficult for him to
Let's
go
just skip
anywhere. They had the fishermen saying they had seen him.
Good
They had one
content
of the
channels,
members
too.
who heard a scream in a specific area. They've done these searches, unfortunately, many times, and most times they find the child hiding somewhere, crying somewhere, but
Yeah,
they're
there we
unhurt.
go.
By the next day, after a full 24
There's
hours
a lot.
of searching, when
There's
they
a
haven't
lot of
found
content about
anything,
411 cases.
that's when the search and rescue
That's why I
team
like to
began
thank
realize that
most
more
of you
than
who have
likely
recommended.
this
Well,
was not
I
gonna be a
shouldn't say most.
successful search.
Most of you
Now,
have
the
recommended
search
me
would go
about
on for a
411.
week. It was a
So,
very chaotic
thank you.
search.
It is a very
The
interesting
case had
subject.
made
I'm glad I'm
national
covering it
headlines,
tonight.
and so people were converging on this area in Colorado just to kind of be a witness to this case. You had volunteers showing up left and right to help search, and police had to actually keep them from going into the area because they didn't want to clutter up the search area. So it's just very chaotic. And also during this time, a helicopter crashed that was
Holy
searching
shit.
for Jared. Luckily, no one perished in that
Yeah,
crash.
thank
but
God for
it
that.
was just this crazy search for about a week, and they don't find anything. A week after the search had begun, they officially called it off. And the going theory was that Jared had most likely been attacked by a mountain lion. 4 years go by, and two hikers were in the same area on the Big South Trail, walking up the trail, and they decide when they got to this one section near where Jared went missing, there was this really steep rocky climb that was not part of the trail. But if you wanted to, and you were adventurous and athletic enough, it's feasible that you could crawl up, hands and knees all the way up this rocky face, and you could get to this.
Sorry, I didn't hit the other button, so I had to mute myself as I sneezed.
Canyon. And so these two hikers decide to do that. So they start climbing up this rocky slope that they would say is a treacherous climb. And actually, David Paulides, the man behind the Missing 411 project, does a video where he climbs up that rocky face, and it looks very steep and difficult to navigate. So these two hikers make it to this outcropping, and the first thing they notice is a pair of brand new children's sneakers, white sneakers.
Oh no!
And as soon as they see it, they think, "Oh, I guess a family must be up here," and they let their kid take their shoes off. And so they're looking around for, like, the family that must have just been adventurous and climbed up here, but there's no one up there.
Nobody's
it's
there.
A small area, and they're like, "Huh? What are these shoes doing up here?" Then they found bits of Jared's clothing near the shoes. His pants were found turned inside out, completely turned inside out. His sweatshirt was more or less intact. Both the sweatshirt and the pants had all the signs of being out in the open for 4 years, with weather hitting hard and being exposed to the elements. They were frayed and tattered. The shoes had also apparently been out in the elements for 4 years, but showed almost no wear and tear. The hikers that found them literally thought they were brand new shoes. And then around that area, they also located one of Jared's teeth, and they found
teeth.
A bone that belonged to Jared as well. So it really begs the question, how did Jared get up nearly 550 feet above the trail over extremely difficult to navigate terrain? And why were his shoes completely unweathered after 4 years of being out in the elements? And why were his shoes up there in the first place? They were untied on his feet. He certainly would not have been able to navigate the terrain up there even with his shoes laced. But if he had been navigating that terrain, he almost certainly would have lost his shoes in the process. So we don't know what actually led to Jared's demise. However, we do know that somehow he was found, his remains were found in an area that was effectively inaccessible to him. In July of 1938, the Beilharz family decided to go camping deep in the Rocky Mountains. Now, the Beilharz family was a huge family. They had 10 kids, including Alfred, who was a 4-year-old boy. One of the days they were camping, they decided to go on a hike to a great fishing spot. And so they got in this big line with all 10 kids and the parents, and they start walking, and Alfred was far back in that line. And at some point, he must have wandered off or got separated, and at some point, the family noticed. There was an immediate preliminary search, and there's a bunch of them. They're calling out to their son, their brother. After this initial search results in nothing, one of the members of the family alerts authorities, and it would launch a 10-day search. When the authorities showed up, they were operating under the assumption that Alfred must have fallen into the river and drowned.
Okay.
And so their efforts went into not only damming the river to stop anything going through, but they also began raking the river as well.
I believe we did hear about this one.
Alfred's remains. When the raking of the river and the damming of the river turned up nothing, the authorities decided to bring in some bloodhounds from a nearby state
we did hear this
pick
one.
up his scent and find
I'm going to skip ahead because
of that. Bring the bloodhounds over to where he went missing, where Alfred had vanished. And they did the same thing. They didn't go down to the river. They followed the exact same trail
up
all the about 500 feet backwards, and then he was never seen again. And so these two separate
line,
that
but they didn't show any signs of a struggle.
That's another 500 feet up on a rocky outcropping that's seemingly inaccessible to a child. And that's all we have. Alfred was never found.
All right, Lillian Carney.
In August of 1897, two parents and their 6-year-old daughter named Lillian went berry picking in Maine. The section of Maine they were in was only 15 miles away from the Canadian border, and it was very, very densely forested. At some point, the parents noticed that Lillian wasn't with them anymore. They assumed she must have wandered a couple feet away. Maybe she was behind a tree. But after an hour of searching, where they can't believe they're not seeing any trace of their daughter. I mean, they're in the middle of nowhere where if you yell out, someone's going to hear you, but there was no response from their daughter. They can't find her anywhere, so they alert authorities.
No response at all.
Hundreds
creepy.
And hundreds of people.
Just in general, all that disappearing is
family is distraught.
terrifying.
They're offering these huge rewards for any information about their daughter. You have all these very experienced outdoorsmen and huntsmen that are going out and looking for this girl. There is nothing. She has vanished completely. During this whole ordeal, friends and family would stay out in the woods overnight. They would just stay out there yelling and calling for Lillian, and she never turned up. About 48 hours after Lillian disappeared, there was a group of people searching an area about 2 to 3 miles away from where Lillian had gone missing. And Lillian just walks out from behind a tree, perfectly calm, doesn't look harmed, and she's just asking for her mother. There's this amazing reunion. It's a miracle.
That's good.
That she's been found. I mean, this is
that one's
2 days
a happy
that
ending.
she's
Thank
been
fuck.
missing in the middle of rural northern Maine. I mean, anything could have happened to her, but she's here. She's alive. When they asked the girl, what happened? Where'd you go? Why did you walk away? Like, what happened? She said something that piqued David Paulides' interest, and this is why this became a part of the Missing 411 project. She said, the sun shined all the time in the woods.
What the fuck?
The problem with that is while she was missing, it was overcast, dark, dreary.
That's
she was in a
strange.
very dense forest where there was, even if it really had been a very sunny day, you're not getting much sunlight coming down to the forest floor. So why would she describe something as being sunny the whole time in the woods when in reality there was almost no sunlight? She also claimed that over the 2 days she was missing, she heard people talking around where she was. But she said that she needed to stay quiet because of the tramps that would be upset if she made any sound. It's just a very strange story, and like every other missing 411 case, there really isn't a good, rational explanation for why it happened. While David Paulides does not come out and say explicitly what he believes is behind all these strange occurrences inside of these missing persons cases, the insinuation or implication of his research is that something paranormal is behind it. So I'd like to hear what you think is behind some of these strange disappearances. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, I would encourage you to gently mule kick the like button and subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4, even 5 video uploads on content that sounds an awful lot like what you just listened to in today's video. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My handle is johnballin416.
Right. Last video for tonight, and then we'll be done. This is 3 people taken away by forest creatures.
Missing inside of national parks and forests all over North America. Of those hundreds of missing people, there's always a few that are particularly strange, that there isn't a rational explanation for how they went missing or where they were discovered. One man named David Paulides, who's a former police detective, made it his mission to start investigating these strange disappearances. And after spending thousands of hours researching them, he saw that there were clusters of areas all over North America where lots of people were going missing under these strange circumstances, and no one was any bit closer to figuring out what happened to these people or why. David Paulides began compiling what he was finding about all these strange cases and putting them into a book series that he calls Missing 411. I went out and purchased all of them. There's like 9 books because I'm totally fascinated by the Missing 411 phenomenon, and I want to continue to read through all of the research that he's done and find some very interesting cases that I can share with you all on my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to focus on 3 stories that all come out of Colorado, and in each story, it's as if someone or something literally picked these people up and moved them great distances to places that they would not have been able to access on their own. Okay. But before we get into today's Missing 411 stories, if you're a fan of Missing 411 or just everything strange, dark, and mysterious, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I post about, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to sneak into the like button's home and replace all of their family photos with pictures of Steve Buscemi. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
Don't miss a damn upload at all. Spooky music.
In 1981, Maurice Doc Demetz was an 84-year-old man living in Colorado. He was a lifelong minister, had a PhD in theology. He also had a blood condition, and he had arthritis in his knees that made it almost impossible for him to walk without assistance. He had always been really passionate about topaz hunting. He would go to these sites where you could dig into the ground and look for these rocks. When you broke them open, you could potentially find topaz. And he loved doing that. Because of his knees and because of his blood condition, he needed someone to go with him to walk him around to the different dig sites and to help him get back into the car and drive him back to his house. Doc had a friend named David McSherry. He wound up being the primary guy that would go with Doc anytime he went topaz hunting. On April 29th, 1981, Doc decides he wants to go topaz hunting. So he calls up David, and they load up David's car, and they head off to Pike National Forest, which was a spot they had gone many times before. And they had this one area that they used to love going in particular called Devil's Head. Locals in the area claimed that that spot was actually haunted by evil spirits. But to Doc and to David, there was no indication that they bought into any of that, and they went there all the time. When they got there on April 29th at 10 a.m., they got out, they went to their favorite dig sites. David actually walked Doc down this hill to this one little clearing. Doc had a backpack with him full of the tools he used to dig out the different rocks. After David had walked Doc to this spot, David walked back up the hill towards their car and went about 50 yards away from where Doc was to his dig site. And over the next several hours, the two would work independent of one another, just digging for topaz.
Dig
Periodically,
for the topaz.
David would look over and he'd make sure that he could see Doc and make sure Doc was
sure
okay.
it's okay.
At 3:45 in the
like
afternoon, David decides, all right, it's probably time to get going soon. And he pokes his head up and he looks in the direction of where Doc was supposed to be, and Doc's not there. He had just seen him about 15 minutes earlier, so he's not concerned. He knows it's only been a few minutes, and frankly, Doc can't really go anywhere. He can barely walk. And so he just kind of stands up and maybe tries to get a better look, and he's thinking, okay, maybe Doc stood up and got behind a tree to relieve himself, or maybe he kind of is just out of sight.
Rational
and
explanation
starts
is got to put
walking
your
down
head
to the area
first.
to just go find Doc. But Doc isn't there, and neither is his backpack with all of his tools. And David's sitting there thinking, I guess Doc must have packed up and headed back to the car. But then David's thinking to himself, in order to go from this dig site up to the car, it means walking up a fairly steep embankment. And there's no way that Doc would have been able to do that without assistance. And so he's looking around the area thinking, is there any sign of something bad happening here? There's no blood. There's no sign of any sort of altercation that would have happened here. David certainly didn't hear anything going on near him. He didn't hear an animal attack or anything like that. So he thinks, okay, somehow he must have got up to the car. David walks up the embankment all the way to the car. Doc's not up there. David goes in the car and he starts honking the horn and yelling out for Doc. No response. As he's honking the horn, 3 motorists come down the road. They see David honking the horn, and so they say, hey, what's going on? David tells them, hey, I got my 84-year-old friend. I don't know where he went.
Doc's
he can't
missing.
have gone far. Can you guys help me look for him? But after David and these motorists spend a couple of hours looking in this area and there's no sign of him, they end up calling the authorities. The police show up, and over the next week, there is this extensive search in this whole area that includes bloodhounds and hundreds of people. But despite this massive effort, nothing is ever found of Doc. He just vanishes. And so Doc's wife writes a letter to the governor of Colorado and just says, he can't have done this on his own.
No, makes no sense.
He can't have walked away on his own. Someone or something lifted him up and took him away. There was no response to this letter, and ultimately Doc's case was shut down. They stopped looking for him and assumed he had died. But when David Paulides looked into this case and featured the Doc DeMetz case on his documentary, they actually reopened the case. But as of right now, there's no new additional details about the whereabouts of Doc DeMetz. To this day, we don't know what happened to him. In 2014, Jim McGrogan was a 39-year-old medical doctor who was living in Indiana with his wife and his 2 kids. He was widely regarded as a very loving husband and devoted father, and everybody seemed to just love this guy. Jim was in phenomenal shape. He had run marathons, triathlons. He loved being in the outdoors, hiking, rock climbing, snowshoeing, skiing. That was Jim's happy place. And so in early March 2014, Jim decides he wants to plan a trip with some friends to go hiking in Colorado. And so he begins planning out where they're going to go hiking, and he finds this amazing trail right opposite the very famous Vail ski resort. Even though Jim was very competent in the outdoors, he would take a survival class and an avalanche preparedness class before he left for Colorado, just to show his wife that he wasn't taking any chances, that he would be well prepared in case the worst were to happen on this trip. About 2 weeks later, he's in Colorado and he heads to a ski shop where he rents a split snowboard as well as loads up on all the supplies that you might need for being in the outdoors. Early the next day, Jim and his friends arrive at the trailhead. Jim, in his backpack, had his cell phone. He also had an extra cell phone battery. He had a great GPS. In addition, he had loads of food and water. He had his split snowboard. He has his avalanche beacon. He's got extra clothing. I mean, this guy is well outfitted for this trip. So they start on this hike, and by 10 a.m. that morning, the rest of the group is feeling tired and wants to take a break.
But
Jim doesn't want to take a break. He's in amazing shape, and he wants to keep going. So he says, hey guys, I'm going to walk just a little bit farther up, and I'll meet you at our next planned stop. No one bats an eye because Jim is like this total stud. He knows what he's doing. And they're like, all right, go ahead.
Jim knows what's up.
Once the group is well rested, they stand back up, and they keep walking. They get to that first stop, and Jim's not there. They think, okay, you know, we were sitting there for a little while. I'm sure he just went to the next planned stop because they had planned stops all along the route. The trail they were on, because it had snowed significantly that winter and lots of people had been on this trail, the trail itself was totally packed down to the dirt. Okay. So it was very easy to identify this trail. Anywhere there wasn't trail was covered in snow. And so if you were walking this trail, it would be really easy to stay on it. Also, if you were to deviate from the trail and start walking away, it would be really obvious because people would see your footprints leaving the trail. But as Jim's friends are making their way up this trail and not seeing Jim at each of these subsequent stops, they don't see any footprints leaving the trail. So they just figured he must have gone all the way to the end. He's just way ahead of us. But by 5 p.m., when they made it all the way up to the top where they planned on stopping and turning around, Jim wasn't there, and they hadn't passed him on the way up, and they hadn't seen any footprints or any ski tracks or anything to indicate that someone had left the path. And so very worried about Jim, they called the authorities. Over the next 5 days, a massive search is launched in this area, including 3 helicopters that scoured an 18-mile square radius. They had scent sniffing dogs out there. They had all these very experienced mountaineers combing the area, but they couldn't find any sign of him. And again, because of all the snow outside of that trail they were on, the helicopter just searched up and down that trail looking for indications that someone had left the trail, looking for those footprints or ski tracks just off that trail they were on, and there weren't any. There was no sign that anyone had left the trail at any point.
Jim gone.
Yet Jim was gone. The authorities, friends, family, everybody's baffled. But they're thinking to themselves, you know, Jim's a really competent outdoorsman. He has a working GPS, and they checked their cell phones. That whole area they were in, they had cell phone reception. So they're thinking to themselves, we don't know what's going on, but I'm sure he's going to turn up at some point. 20 days after Jim went missing, his body is discovered by 2 hikers 7 kilometers away from the trail he had been on when he went missing. He had died from significant head trauma as well as a broken femur. It looked like he had fallen from a really great height, but it wasn't entirely clear where he had actually fallen from. He was found with just leggings and a shirt on, no jacket and no boots, and his boots were nowhere to be found. His backpack was next to him, and inside of it was his GPS that worked and his cell phone that worked. He even had an extra battery for his cell phone. Yet at no point had he tried to use his cell phone over the duration of the time he had been out there. He also had lots of food and water and additional clothing. He had a tent, but it looked like none of it had been touched since he packed it originally. And then strangest of all is there were no footprints or ski tracks leading up to either where he was or any of the surrounding areas. There were no tracks to show how he actually got where he got. It's as if he had been lifted off the trail 7 kilometers away and dropped where he was. When the exact location of where he was found was communicated back to the authorities, the helicopter pilots who had been involved in that initial 5-day search said that we looked at that area multiple times and he wasn't there. So at some point after those 5 days, Jim had found a way to land 7 kilometers away in this random place with no footprints that lead to it, no tracks, no anything. We know he had a working cell phone and a working GPS.
I don't know how you get there.
And we know that he didn't make it to this spot where he ultimately was found in the first 5 days.
I mean, I'm a big skeptical of a lot of things.
What was he doing in those first 5 days?
Like,
why wasn't he using his cell phone to communicate what was going on? Why wasn't he using his GPS to get back to safety? Why didn't he use the supplies in his backpack to save his life? Why did he take his boots off? And then how did he wind up in the location he was in? Because there was no tracks that would have led to that spot.
Bobby Blitzup.
In 1958, Bobby Bizup was a 10-year-old living in Colorado. He was almost completely deaf, so he wore a hearing aid, and he came from a family that was devoutly Catholic.
I don't want to go in the woods
that
now.
summer, Bobby's family decided to send him to a Catholic camp for boys.
Stay
it was
with
located at the
in
St.
the
Malo Church inside of Rocky Mountain National Park. The camp itself was situated at the base of Mount Meeker. Anytime the boys were up the mountain, which was pretty steep, they could always look down and see this camp. In addition, there was this stream that fed right by the camp. So if they could just get to the stream anytime they were up in the mountain, they could follow it all the way down and get back to the camp. This was something that they told all of the boys in case they got lost up in the mountain. On August 15th, around 6 p.m., Bobby was a little ways up from the camp fishing along that river. And one of the camp counselors was making his way up to try to get all the boys to come back down for dinner. This camp counselor would say that he clearly saw Bobby recognize that it was time to come back down, it was time for dinner. He clearly saw Bobby turn and start walking down towards the camp. At which point the counselor turned his back on Bobby and he too began walking down towards the camp, which was not very far away. When the counselor got to the camp and turned back around though, Bobby was gone. And so the counselor starts immediately tracing his steps back to try to find Bobby, but he can't find him anywhere. The counselor goes and gets a number of the other counselors to come help him find Bobby. After about 30 minutes, no sign of Bobby. He's just gone. The camp counselors are looking around thinking, how is this possible?
I legit hear scream-like noises in my woods from time to time. Well,
he was right
I don't know what to tell you,
but how could he have gotten lost in such a
people
short
are probably
amount of time
dying.
And in an area where he could literally see the camp and was actually on the river that leads right back to the camp. It didn't make any sense.
A creepy van down by the river.
Authorities and this massive search is launched to find Bobby. Over 300 people come out, including people from the military. It's this huge search, and nothing is found of this boy.
Or raped.
He's
that can happen too in
gone.
woods.
10 days after he went missing, they had to call off the search
both at the
because
same
there was
time.
absolutely no sign of this child. Even after the search ended, many of the camp counselors continued to, in their off time, scour the area around the camp to look for Bobby. And a year later, 3 camp counselors would actually find him. 3 camp counselors decided to go to a very hard to access area that had been searched previously, but they felt like it was the one spot that needed a little bit more attention. And it was 5 kilometers west of the camp and almost 800 yards up a fairly steep incline. This is a hard to access area. But they climbed their way up there, and sure enough, even though this area had been searched before, they found Bobby's hearing aid, bits of his clothing, and some of his bones. They didn't find any more of his remains, and no one knows what actually happened to him. But it really makes you wonder, what happened after the camp counselor turned his back on Bobby? It's as if someone scooped him up and flew him away. And even if he had intentionally run away, it would have been very difficult for a 10-year-old to get to that particular location where he was found. And to what end? Why would he have wanted to get up there?
I'm a very skeptical,
and so, like many of the other missing 411 cases, we are
some of the
left with a
shit's
series
weird.
of questions and
I don't know how to
answers.
explain
so I'd love to get your
rationally.
theories as to what's causing these strange disappearances, and I'll do my best to get back to as many people as I can. So if you enjoyed today's stories, I would encourage you, if you have not already, to sneak into the Like Button's house and replace all of their family pictures with pictures of Steve Buscemi. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4, even 5 video uploads. If you're interested in learning more about the missing 411 phenomenon, I provided links below to David Paulides and his team. If you have story suggestions for this channel, I have a subreddit called Mr. Ballin. It's linked below in the description, and you can just drop your story suggestions right in there. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallin416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballin. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, some combination, I just really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it, guys.
All right. That's it for us tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for sticking with me as we went into the skim primer of 411, a very deep subject that a lot of people on YouTube have covered, as you can tell from all the channels we watch besides Mr. Ballin and the others. They have highly in-depth series of cases since it stretches a long way back of people going missing. Anyway, I'm going to do a little shilling and then we're done. Don't forget the movie caption contest, movie Pictionary, and movie Hangman are going to Discord, so be sure to play those. Don't forget tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the Discord, Porky and Genova will be showing us another Fast and Furious movie. We're on the 4th one now, so that's going to be fun. And don't forget on Sunday back here, me and Weeb should be doing Fans of Fiction, so be sure to tune in for that as well. And after that, I will see you guys later. I hope you all have a good night. Peace, everybody. Laters.